For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
In 60 minutes, 60 seconds. Oh, I think we're live.
You're live.
Hi. Hello, folks. Kent Hovind here, and Nolan in some undisclosed location.
Savannah, Georgia.
Savannah, Georgia. There we go. Okay, thank you, Nolan. We are going to be discussing what the Bible teaches, and then on the creation, and Nolan's going to give his refutation of that. So thank you, Nolan, for doing this. How many times have we met together for heated discussions like this? Is this number 3?
3, I believe.
Yeah.
This will be the 3rd one. And then hopefully there will be a 4th one where I say what I believe and you to try to, refute. I would like, give you your shot to do that again.
I would be honored to do that.
Well,
okay.
Great.
All right.
Sounds good.
Well, let's see. Give a little background because there's a lot of new folks, and we're going live, I believe, on several different social media, which is I don't understand. But Steve, our techno guy, and Nick are in there working on that right now. For those I'll give a little background. For those that may not know, my name's Kent Hovind. I was a high school science and math teacher for 15 years. I moved to Pensacola, Florida in January of '89, and soon thereafter began a ministry called Creation Science Evangelism. I've been an ordained Baptist preacher since 1974. And I take the position that the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate, that God made the world in 6 days, and it is not millions of years old, and dinosaurs did not live millions of years ago, and the Bible can be trusted in every detail. So that's what I'm going to be presenting in just a few minutes. But Nolan, did you want to give an intro about yourself and what got you into this topic and why your interest?
Well, let's say I grew up going to church since I was a baby. That's why and I was in church forever. And but after it took a while, and I finally, I would say, I was baptized in 3rd grade, and then it changed my life for a long time. And then it took a while in learning other stuff and seeing things that were different. I even watched your videos in 7th grade. That's when I was first introduced to that. And after some, with the internet, I think is what did it. I kept reading other things and reading and learning how the Bible is transmitted or this, that, and so-called contradictions or this, and then how, and after a while, it took me a long time. It was scary. I didn't go willingly, but I finally lost my faith around about 18 or 19, and I still fascinated by religion. I love it. I study Christianity, especially early Christianity, and I love science. I've always, and of course, I don't believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old. I think that's crazy. Not crazy, but I don't think it's. I think it's a short-sighted view and a very human-centric way of looking at stuff, and I don't see why an old Earth or evolution has any problem, reconciling with the Bible if that's what people want to believe. But anyway, I'm an agnostic, so I just don't know. But anyway, not much about me. Nobody special. Just somebody that reads a lot. I have a lot of time on my hands, and I hope we have fun with this.
Okay. Well, there you go. You asked me to present what I believe, and what I believe the Bible teaches. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
When I was 16, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior, started going to a little independent, temperamental, fundamental, right-wing, radical, chicken-eating Baptist church in Pekin, Illinois, and began to grow in the Lord and read my Bible. And I did not reach a point where my faith failed me, where I gave up. It actually got stronger. It's been nearly 50 years now. This February 9th, it'll be 50 years since I accepted Christ. And I've read the Bible, I don't know how many times, many times, scores of times, and I believe it to be literally true. Now, what's got me started in this, just as a 16-year-old, when I accepted Christ and started going to church, I was taking a lot of science classes in high school, sophomore year, took all the sciences I could. Ended up teaching science and mathematics for 15 years. My dad and older brother were both engineers. My mother and second brother were both public school teachers. And so the teaching and mathematics and engineering type stuff, logical thinking, I guess, kind of runs in our family. We would always have, very entertaining discussions on a variety of topics growing up around the house in East Peoria, Illinois. But when I began reading my Bible, you don't have to read very far, and you get to chapter 5 of Genesis, and it says Adam was 130 when his son was born. And I thought, well, that's kind of old to have a baby. And then it says he lived 800 years after that. You can read all this in Genesis chapter 5 for yourself. But being from a family of engineers and mathematicians, I made a chart, a graph, which I have right here in front of me. I graphed out 100-year increments on the graph. Adam is 130 when his son is born, and I'm sure you've seen my graph many times, Nolan. And then it says he lived 800 years after that. That's what it says, Genesis chapter 5. Well, that means Adam lived to be 930. And then it says his son Seth lived 105 years and begat Enos, and he lived 807 years after that and had sons and daughters. Hebrew tradition, there's no scripture for this, but Hebrew tradition is that Adam and Eve had 56 children. Well, in 800 years, I think you could have a whole lot more than that, but 56 would be no problem. So if you say these people are producing children for 800 years per couple, like the Bible indicates, and they had, if you just take 50 kids per family, you take 50 times 50 times 50 times 50, you very quickly get into ginormous numbers. So there were very soon millions of people on the planet, and maybe even over 1 billion if you want to go 10 generations down to Noah. Probably could be many more than that. But this is what the Bible says, and I believe that. I think there's certainly, we have the scripture teaches that plain and simple. We have the testimony of Jesus Christ, who certainly believed the Bible and quoted from Genesis 25 times. So if someone says they do not believe the Genesis story, which of course they're welcome to do, they have to admit or realize they're calling Jesus a liar, at least the recorded testimony of Jesus for us in the Bible. I think you'll also find there's a huge amount of what's called anecdotal evidence. Stories from countries all over the world talk about a time called the Golden Age. The Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Chinese, the people from ancient sections of India have legends of a golden age. And they'll say in those legends that man used to live to be nearly 1,000, and they didn't have to perform agriculture like they do today. Things just grew, just rapid growth of all the plants. So it wasn't nearly as laborious as it is today to try to just survive on the planet. It was much easier. I'll call it Garden of Eden conditions, though technically Garden of Eden was only one spot as opposed to the whole planet. But I would say, why would there be all these legends of a golden age where people live to be 1,000 in some of the legends? Bible dates, the oldest one is Methuselah at 969, but quite a few, all of them except for one, lived into the 900s. Enoch, who never died, lived to be 365 and was apparently translated straight to heaven. And another guy is just under 900 with 895. That would be Mahalalel. So, but still, 912 is the average age from the dates given just from those 10 patriarchs in the Bible. So I see no reason to doubt that. I see every reason to believe that. If you look at it from a scientific perspective, humans, you get a new set of teeth when you're, anywhere from 7 to 15, your teeth are falling out and coming in. Then finally, wisdom teeth, sometime between 16 and 25. A dentist could tell you the age range there. But there's been studies done that said, if a person could, and there's been actually examples of this where people are getting a third set of teeth. It appears that if you could live to be 150, you would get a new set of teeth come in. Just like you got your second set, you would get a third set. So one of the arguments against the great age, 900 years, is your teeth would wear out. And I understand that concern, but there may be something coded already to prevent that or to take care of that with new teeth every 100 years, let's say. I can't prove that. That is just anecdotal evidence. You can Google, do people ever get a third set of teeth? And there have been numerous cases where it has happened. People just in their 60s or 70s, a new set of teeth grow in. So there must be something in the gene code to do that. But regardless, the Bible clearly teaches people lived to be over 900 before the flood came. Now, I look at this as a science teacher and say, what about other animals? If man's living to be 900, maybe everything is living much longer. And it's a biological fact that reptiles and kangaroos, by the way, and a few other mammals never stop growing. So something must have been different in what I'll call the pre-flood time frame. There's about 1700 years in here before the flood comes in the days of Noah. Something was very different. And quite a few animals have been found in the fossil record that are absolutely huge, like dinosaurs. Well, reptiles never stop growing. There may be a few exceptions to that, but I believe from what I've read, all reptiles never stop growing. If their growth rate slows down, but they don't actually stop growing. There's something at the end of the cells, the bone cells that differentiate, that cause them to, they grow all their life. So if reptiles could live to be 900, that would be the dinosaurs. So I believe the creation perspective of history is man lived to be 900. All the animals were living much longer. 900 is 10 times longer than our average lifespan today, 10 or 12 times longer. So if we assume something similar, proportional true for other animals, it would be logical to see reptiles get to be 60 feet long, which is what we do see in the fossils. We find dinosaur bones with 100 feet long dinosaurs. So we find giant insects. Well, insects have to breathe through their skin, through spiracles. So they're very limited in how big they can get. I use the surface area to volume ratio on my seminar part 4. If you watch my creation seminar part 4 on drdino.com, or just Google Kent Hovind creation seminar part 4, I show a bunch of slides, and I could get them up here now, but it'd be laborious. A 1-inch cube, 1 by 1 by 1, a cube, has 1 cubic inch, but it has 6 sides, so it has 6 inches of skin, if it was an insect, to breathe, to supply the oxygen for 1 cubic inch of tissue, 6-to-1 ratio. What if we enlarge it to 2? If we go to 2 by 2 by 2, well, 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. There are now 8 cubic inches. Each side having 4 square inches, 4 times the 6 sides is 24. Hold it. We just went from 6-to-1 ratio, skin to volume, down to 24 to 8, which is 3-to-1. By enlarging the size, we effectively made it harder for the creature to breathe, since he has to breathe through his skin. So any simple mathematics would tell you, if a creature is breathing through its skin, there's a certain size where it just simply cannot get enough oxygen to survive. We get dragonflies today that have 5-inch wingspan, but they find fossil dragonflies with 40 or 50-inch wingspan. So my perspective on this would be the fossil, if you call it a fossil record, there really is no fossil record. There are billions of fossils. But the fossils that have been recorded and studied and analyzed indicate insects were huge sometime in the past. Now, we would differ as far as when that was. I would say, yeah, that was just before the flood. And on this chart behind me, which I believe shows on screen or behind me here, the bottom timeline gives the big picture of history, and the top timeline is the details of what the Bible says is coming next about the future. This is from my series I did, my book and my chart on what on earth is about to happen, called WOE, W-O-E, for what on earth. But the Bible dates add up to the creation being about 6,000 years ago, and the flood being about 4,400 years ago. So something was different back here before the flood came. I believe this is the age of dinosaurs. This is the age of ginormous animals of all kinds. They find fossil kangaroos 10 feet tall. Well, kangaroos are one of those creatures that never stop growing. They find fossil wombat the size of a small car, like a Volkswagen. So I don't think anybody's going to argue that, yes, huge, huge fossils of many animals have been found. The question would be, we would differ on when was this and what caused it. I don't think you're going to have an explanation for 50-inch dragonflies other than to say there had to be greater air pressure to get the air into the body, or richer oxygen concentration. Today, the air we're breathing is about 21% oxygen, depending if you're in the woods or wherever you are, because the trees produce more of it, but roughly 21% average oxygen. The amber, petrified amber tree sap has been found with air bubbles in it. They analyze the air bubbles and find they're 32% oxygen. That's 50% more than we have today. We have 21. They used to have 32. At least that's what the air bubbles trapped in amber now indicate. My theory on that would be the flood in the days of Noah would have broken trees by the millions all over the world, and as the flood is going on, it's destroying everything, all the animals that weren't on the ark, trees being either buried to turn into coal or petrified wood. But broken trees the sap would ooze out, and that would turn into amber. Insects could get trapped in there very easily. They find snakes trapped in amber, whole snake. Birds, quite a few frogs, quite a few fish have been found in amber. You can just Google amber fossils, but that's a different story. Let's assume that this amber that we're finding is indeed from the flood in the days of Noah. Probably that's what formed most of the amber. And the air bubbles are 32% oxygen. So I would say that's probably trapping the pre-flood atmosphere. And now we're digging them up and analyzing, say something was different back here. I think before the flood, they not only had greater air pressure, they had greater oxygen concentration. And those are two key factors that allowed them to live much longer. Plus, I think the Bible clearly teaches in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6 and 7, that there was water above the firmament. Now, the firmament, it tells us down in verse 20 of Genesis chapter 1, the firmament is where the birds fly. So that would be the atmosphere. So there used to be water above the atmosphere. I take the strong position that was probably a canopy of ice. The Jews have always taught it was 2 or 3 fingers thick. So let's just take the assumption that the earth, 10 miles above the earth, had a canopy, a crystalline canopy like a greenhouse, a couple of fingers thick, a couple inches thick of solid ice. Outer space is 450 some degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, 3 degrees Kelvin, minus 170 centigrade, minus 455, I think, Fahrenheit. Okay, doesn't matter. The fact is, outer space is real cold. So if this canopy of super cold ice could be suspended by air pressure, squeezing our current atmosphere, of which is, say, 50 miles of air stretched out, if you could squeeze it down to 10 miles, encapsulated in a sphere of ice, it could be held up like an inflatable building. You know, a few inches of ice wouldn't weigh much. It would take 1.2 atmospheres, I think, is what it would, mathematics works out to be, instead of 1 atmosphere. Atmospheric pressure, 14.7 pounds at sea level per square inch. So increasing air pressure just 10 or 15 or 20% would float a canopy above the atmosphere. The other factor that might have been involved, again, this is all gone, so whatever happened, the canopy's now gone. I can't prove this. This is my theory. But a canopy of ice would maintain its frozen position, being in contact with outer space. Just like an Eskimo can walk into his ice igloo and build a fire. He can't melt the roof because outside it's so cold, it conducts the heat away. Any excess heat is conducted away through the roof into the bitter cold outside, just like I think the canopy would be preserved by suspended by the air pressure or the magnetic field. Extremely cold ice down below 300 below 0 Fahrenheit takes on different character traits. The crystals realign, just like when you squeeze ice and squeeze the air bubbles out, it becomes firn, F-I-R-N, and it behaves like plastic. It flows. Glaciers will actually slowly flow like silly putty down a mountain because it's glacial firn. It's not just sliding like a landslide or an avalanche, it's actually creeping along. Well, at extremely low temperatures, the ice would become magnetic. It would also become fiber optic. There's been lots of research done on this. Different creationists have published plenty of information. But to summarize my position, the Bible clearly teaches, I think, that there was a canopy of ice above the atmosphere, and that explains that would block out UV light. That increased air pressure, increased oxygen, perfect diet, perfect soil to grow things in. All of that, of course, all of that was destroyed at that flood. The soil is now destroyed, rearranged. The atmosphere is now 60 miles thick instead of 10, so we only have less air pressure. Now we're getting all the radiation in from the sun, the UV light, ultraviolet, X-rays, etc. After the flood, you see a rapid drop in lifespans. If you go to Genesis chapter 10 and 11, the lifespans drop off quickly to 400 for a few generations, and then down to 200, and then down to 100, And today, not many people make it to 100. So something was different, and it changed because, I think, because of that flood. The things that would have changed by that flood would be the soil now being all disrupted, and the good topsoil now mixed in with all kinds of other things that are less fertile. I think you'd have more radiation from the sun. You'd start to get a declining genetic code. Today, the average person has 3,500 defective genes in their gene code. So if you marry close to your bloodline, like if you married your first cousin or aunt or niece or sister, there's a very high probability you would produce deformed children, because there's a great chance that out of the thousands of genes that we have, those 3,500 would line up and there'd be something wrong with the child. Hexadecimalism, 6 fingers, 6 toes. Albinoism is sometimes from that. The different things can happen to cause deformities in children. That would not be the case with the original creation. They had a pure gene code. And by the time you get to Abraham, who's way down here, 2,000 years after the creation, God told, I'm sorry, not even Abraham married his half-sister. You go from Abraham, a few hundred years later, you get to Moses on my chart here. Abraham, you go to Moses about 1400 BC, and God gave his laws to Moses. He said, Moses, you can't marry cousins anymore. Don't marry close kin. But really, for the first 25 years of human history, it was allowed. There was no mention of it being wrong until Moses, way up here. And in many cultures today, they still marry close kin. There are tribes all over the planet that it's required that you marry in the tribe. Look up the ostrich people. They're required to marry in the tribe, and they only have 2 toes on their feet. They're deformed, and their teeth fall out in the middle of the night just sleeping. So they have some serious genetic problems from marrying close kin. So the creation view would be God made everything in 6 days. And it was perfect, absolutely perfect. Man sinned, introduced sin and disobedience into the world, and man brought death into the world. Nothing would have died had Adam not sinned. Of course, the evolution theory says death is what brought man into the world, which is the exact opposite of what the Bible says. That flood explains all the geology that we see. The Grand Canyon probably formed as a result of the flood. The whole Central California Valley was probably a giant lake for maybe 50 or 100 years after the flood, when it got too deep, went over the top and washed out the San Francisco Bay. If you closed up the San Francisco Bay, the big lake would fill in from Redding clear down to Bakersfield, California. That's quite obviously a drained lake. Same thing with El Paso, Texas. It's called El Paso because it's the pass through the mountains. Close up that gap between the mountains where El Paso is, and a big lake would form behind it. The Rio Grande would be, that part of it would be a giant lake into New Mexico. So I think that the flood is the only explanation for the fossils that we find. A guy called me today from Poland talking about the fossils. And I said, well, question, how many animals are going to die today? He said, millions. I said, how many are going to be fossilized? He said, probably none. I said, well, you can Google the Karoo Formation, Karoo, where they find estimated 800 million vertebrate fossils in one big, huge graveyard. Vertebrate meaning they have a backbone. So if you have 800 million fossils in one pile, I think that's indication A, they were buried rapidly. Today, if an animal dies, the scavengers haul it all over the woods. The buzzards, the coyotes, the animals, the ants, they drag it off. You're hardly going to find 2 bones together. You're not going to find a whole skeleton. The only way you can explain completely articulated skeletons, all the bones connected, buried and turned to stone, I think the only logical explanation is they were rapidly buried before any scavengers had time to get to them, and that would be Noah's flood. Clams in the closed position indicate they had to be buried alive, because when you go walk along the beach, you find millions of seashells, but you never find a matched pair. If they're dead, they open and something eats them right away. The seagulls, the fish, crabs, something eats them and they're gone. They fall apart. So petrified clams in the closed position, and we have hundreds in our museum in Lenox, Alabama, they're an indication of extremely rapid burial. Probably buried alive in mud, couldn't even open up. They woke up dead and petrified in the closed position. Petrification can take place very rapidly under the right conditions, heat, pressure, minerals, etc. So my position is that the Bible teaches there was a creation 4,400 years ago. There was a flood in the days of Noah, which explains all the fossils, explains all the geology, all the strata of the earth, all the layers formed in that flood, not different ages, Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic. My position is the geologic column is a joke. It's a hoax. It doesn't exist. There is no geologic column. It doesn't exist. And then after the flood, God called one man named Abraham, said, I got a special job for you. You and your children are going to carry, you're going to bring the world my word, the Bible. You're going to bring the world the Messiah, and you're going to be a model nation. If you're good, I'm going to bless you. If you're bad, I'm going to curse you. I'm going to show the rest of the world through you guys, the Jews, the descendants of Abraham, how I want things done. And so I believe the Bible is exactly literally true. Man is a sinful state, and we've fallen from God, and we need to be redeemed. And Jesus Christ came down about 2,000 years ago, died on the cross to pay for our sins. And anyone that will receive him can become a child of God, like I am, almost 50 years now. All right, that was 28 minutes. Sorry about that, Nolan, but your turn. Tell me what you don't believe about that.
That's no problem, because I mean, from this point, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And, well, for starters, I just want to say something about teeth wearing out. Did you know a 5-year-old, they can do an x-ray of their mouth and find out they see the other teeth, all the other teeth, including the wisdom teeth. They're already in your mouth. There are no third set of teeth. If anybody's had a third set of teeth, it's because of a mutation that was shouldn't have happened. Some people have 2 sets when they're born, but no, there's no third set at 150. They've done x-rays on people's mouths. That dentist would have known this. But beside that, okay, we need to get down to this. First, I need to ask these questions, okay? What would constitute a contradiction in the Bible to you? What constitutes one? What would you say would constitute one?
Well, whether there are contradictions in the Bible, I would say doesn't matter. You asked me what I believe. I told you that's what I believe. Now, if you don't want to believe it, that's your choice. But I think the contradiction, there have been, I would point out that the Bible is the anvil that's worn out many hammers over the centuries. There have been about 500 supposed contradictions pointed out. All of them have been successfully answered, I believe. But I would want you to keep in mind, Aristotle said, 400 BC, if there's an argument about a book, the book cannot get up and talk. It can't defend itself. So the benefit of the doubt goes to the document. The critic must prove his point. So if you think you have a contradiction, if that's where you want this discussion to go, tell me what it is, and I'll either already have the answer or I'll find it.
I'm trying to ask quick questions right now.
Okay.
Just a quick question. What would constitute one? What would you, if something says one thing and then another one says something different, or if it says a certain number and another one says a different number, what would constitute a contradiction to you?
Well, obviously, let's suppose one observer says a certain number and another observer says a different number. That may or may not be a contradiction. It might be that I only saw 4 people there and somebody from a different angle saw 7 people there. So there may be an answer to it. I don't know. That's an apparent contradiction.
Also, that whole Aristotle's dictum thing, by that logic, Lord of the Rings could be considered true, because it's a document and you have to give it the benefit of the doubt, and there's no contradictions in Lord of the Rings, so you might as well believe in Middle Earth by that logic. But anyways, okay, what if something wasn't scientifically accurate in the Bible? Okay, as if it were impossible, or what would your answer be to that? Would you just say it was miraculous, or would you try to find an answer for it to say it could be scientifically accurate?
Okay. Well, I guess I'd want a specific rather than a generic statement.
Of course.
Like that.
I'm going to get into specifics.
Okay. Is it scientifically accurate to say a snake can talk, or a man can walk on water, or the dead can come back to life? By all of our modern science and observations, no, we never observed that. Does that mean it can't happen? Well, if you're talking about the creator of the universe doing this, if he can make the snake to begin with, he can certainly make it talk. If he can make the person come alive, he can also make a dead person come alive. So I don't think that would prove a contradiction or anything scientifically inaccurate. Maybe unexplainable would be a better word than inaccurate.
How about this? If the world were old, would that make the Bible wrong? 4.6 billion years old.
4.6 billion years old. Would that
or 4.5? Would that make the Bible wrong?
That would certainly contradict what the Bible, I think the Bible clearly teaches. More important than Earth being old, though, would be the Bible clearly teaches that nothing died till Adam sinned. So if you want your 4.6 billion year old Earth to have animals or plants dying, or not plants necessarily, but animals dying before man even comes along, that would clearly contradict the Bible. If there was death before sin, yes, the Bible would be wrong, or somebody would be wrong.
Okay. What, if anything, would change your mind?
I'm very open-minded. I have reasonably high IQ. I've got quite a bit of education. I've read prolifically on these topics. I'm willing to listen to anything.
But what, if anything, would change your mind? Can you give me an example of something that would change your mind?
Kind of an unfair question. If I told you pigs could fly, what would change your mind to make you believe they could fly? Well, you'd want to see one fly.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to see one fly. I guess if you could demonstrate something scientifically or mathematically incorrect in the Bible, I would certainly, if I couldn't find an answer, I'd certainly come into question and doubt. Say, well, maybe there's something here. Sure.
About the same thing I would say about what I believe. Okay. Now, let's go into this whole thing about the reason that there are certain things called golden ages, or what people wrote about. There's a very simple reason for that. People used to deify their ancestors. There's still ancestor worship today in certain things. And the reason that, I mean, the Sumerians said that the kings lived till 28,000 years, and but it's a deification of ancestors. And but that's the reason for that. And reptiles never stop growing, but they grow so small of a number, like percentage-wise, after they're an adult, that it's almost negligible. It's not like they just grow 30 more feet if they could just live, 20, 50 more years. But that's neither here nor there. What I wanted to say, for starters, you believe that, you said the Bible says that animals bring forth after their kind?
Yes, sir.
Can you show me what verse says that?
Well, Genesis chapter 1, the first chapter, says it 10 times.
What name the verse?
Genesis, got it right in front of me here. Genesis chapter 1. Let's see. The first one, I think, is in verse 20. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. And every winged fowl after his kind. Or 10 times, from verse 21 on, in these 10 verses. 10 times.
We read that carefully. It said, which the waters bring forth abundantly after their kind.
Okay.
It says over and over, let the earth bring forth living creature after his kind. Okay.
This is the initial creation. When God first made them, he made the waters bring forth the fish after their kind. He made the ground bring forth the animals after its kind. Since then, that's all we've ever seen is animals producing after their kind.
But but the Bible never says that it says that animals bring forth after their kind. It never says it specifically. It says that the earth because you wouldn't say today the earth brings forth animals. That would, or the water does. But okay, let's go to Leviticus, I believe. Let me get it's talking about ravens in this Leviticus chapter. I believe it's Leviticus 11, chapter 11, and let me see here. It says,
verse 15. Every raven after his kind.
Yes, every raven and every vulture and kite after his kind.
Right.
Now, if it says that a raven after his kind can't really be a family or anything higher than that, because a raven is a corvus, is the genus, and then a species of it. So if a raven is after its kind, it would be every species of raven. because they're all in the genus Corvus, and so are other animals, not just the ravens, other birds. And vulture, another animal just like that, and a kite. Hawk after his kind. It doesn't say bird anymore. This is more specific.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is, if you say that kind means past family or even sometimes order, because I've heard you say lizard or something, or maybe it's still a bird, which a bird's a class of animals. Of course, nothing's going to give birth to an animal that's not a bird. Would always have a bird or a.
Right.
But what?
I'm glad
Of
you
course,
agree.
everybody believes that. Every person in evolution believes that. No, every animal has its own the species. There's no other way around that. But every animal has has babies or offspring of the same species. But after time, speciation happens. You believe that because you believe that zebras and horses come from the same kind, right? So
you're confusing the terms here. Back in, I don't know the date, 1600s, Carolus Linnaeus, maybe it was even, he developed our current classification system, kingdom, order, family. King Philip came over for Girl Scouts.
Kingdom, Brown, class, order, family, genus,
Kingdom,
species.
phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Right. Been years since I taught that. Okay. So he developed that system to try to put our modern distinction on, is this the same kingdom as this kingdom? This is all in the last few hundred years. We've tried to classify animals. Man likes to classify things, keep the screwdrivers in one drawer and the hammers in another drawer. That's just people have done that for decades, for centuries, trying to organize things in our mind. Well, 6,000 years before that, God said they'll bring forth after their kind.
But it doesn't say that.
Okay.
It says that the earth.
God created the animals. I'll rephrase it.
Yes,
God
he created the animals after their kind.
He created the animals.
And it also says raven after kind.
Right. So is a raven and a hawk the same kind? No. They might be they might be both in the same class, aves, or is that an order? I forget.
Yeah, it's a class.
Okay. So they're both in the same class called aves, but they're obviously a different kind of animal. A hawk and a raven are different.
Heard from upgrade to Mac OS High Sierra.
That's my thing. It's all good. Anyway, okay. So what I wanted to say is about that is that the whole thing. But you believe that horses and zebras have common ancestors, right?
I believe a horse and a zebra to a 5-year-old would be the same kind of animal as opposed to a horse and a pine tree.
Do they have a common ancestor?
Probably. I don't know. I don't know if I could prove that.
Okay. Would you say a wolf and an African wild dog, or an African painted wild dog has would be a common ancestor?
Well, I don't think I could prove that either. That would be reasonable, more reasonable than saying an African painted dog and a pine tree have a common ancestor, which is what you believe.
Tigers and lions.
Tigers and lions can crossbreed. They get a liger or a tigon, depending which one's the male.
Infertile, though.
Yeah, usually infertile. I think horses and asses breed and get a donkey, and they are 99.99% infertile. But there have been a few fertile ones.
The ones that are fertile are only fertile because they breed with another donkey, and what is born is a donkey. It's not a mule.
Sure.
They're not fertile with a mule. You get what I'm saying? It has to go back to the.
Oh, I understand. I agree.
But what I'm saying is,
they're the same kind of animal. They have hooves. They have 4 legs.
Not dogs. That you'll say dogs create dogs, or okay. But would you say horses bring forth zebras?
No, I would say the common ancestor. Would I say Chihuahuas bring forth Great Danes? No.
Of course not.
But some kind of dog-like ancestor had the gene code that could be selected for smallness or selected for bigness by whoever's doing the selecting.
Well, there's a lot of adaptation there, too. It took a long time to do that.
Well, I think you could take generic dogs and selectively breed down to Chihuahuas in 100 years. I've had people
somebody tell you that, but does that mean that it's...
I don't know. 200 years.
Okay, but so what I'm saying is if at some point you believe that animals speciated to horses, to zebras, to donkeys, to all that, at some point something had to bring forth not It was the same and then it had to become a different species completely.
Well, you're switching words from kind to species, which is what they always do in these debates and discussions.
Because kind, I just showed you that kind can mean a species as well. I've showed you that kind can mean kinds of birds, kind of raven, kind of hawk. But
well, I don't know what the original kinds were. Let's pick a number and say there were 4 original kinds of single hoof-like animals that we classify. The horse, the zebra may have had a common ancestor. They may not have. I think they most likely did. But that is not evidence that the horse and the pine tree have a common ancestor, which is what you believe.
But if it's evidence of that, if you go back further from that, you could say that if that had a common ancestor, and then you go further and say, could this too have a common ancestor?
This is why it's a religion. This is why it's something you believe. It's not science.
But we're not going to talk. We're not speaking on it. I just wanted to say that kind can be. It's too flexible of a thing. Anyway,
so is species.
If you think so, but I believe species just means an animal that
is a dog and a wolf a different species?
No, they're not.
Okay.
They're not. Look it up. Canis lupus and Canis lupus domesticus. It's just a subspecies.
Is a horse and a zebra a different species?
Absolutely.
Can they interbreed?
No.
You sure?
Nope. They can't interbreed. They can have.
Ever heard of a zorse?
Yeah, a zorse, but that's not interbreeding. They can't have fertile offspring. That's what a species.
I didn't say fertile. They produce an offspring.
But that's what species is, having fertile offspring. That's how you know. But anyway, how about Genesis 9:2? It says, "And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered." Do you believe that?
Yeah, I can read it. I got it right in front of me.
Do you believe it?
I believe after the flood, before the flood, all of the animals were friendly. They had no reason to fear man because everybody was vegetarian. Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 and 30 indicate that all the animals and all the people were, at least they were supposed to, eat plants. They were vegetarian, lived on a vegetarian diet. After the flood, God's telling Noah now, after the flood, hey, the animals are going to be afraid of you. And you can go ahead and eat them in the next verse.
It says all of them, though.
I think
God. You believe that great white sharks fear man?
I think all animals. Well, this is. Well, let's read it carefully.
It said upon all that moveth upon the earth, upon all the fishes of the sea.
Do you think? Do you think great whites have a fear of man?
Nope.
Not at all.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't believe that worms have a fear of man. I think that certain animals, it says all that moveth too. But I don't believe blue whales have a fear of man. There's actually a lot of animals we know don't have fear of man.
And that's enough for you.
Oh, I'm just saying that's not. I would say that's not a true statement. Is what I'm saying.
Okay, and that's enough for you to doubt the whole Bible because of that.
But also, do you believe that just two people can have enough genetic differences between them to have a whole population be born from them?
You believe the whole population came from a rock.
No, that we're not talking about that right now.
Well, that's what evolution teaches.
No, but that isn't what we're talking about.
Okay.
The question was.
Yes, I believe every human on the planet today, all the dark-skinned, light-skinned, red-skinned people with blonde hair, brown hair.
All the genetic differences.
All of that came from Adam and Eve. I believe that. Just like I believe all the Chihuahuas and the Great Danes and the Dobermans could all be bred back could all have come from the gene code of 2 original dogs. I believe that.
And you do know dogs reproduce 40 times faster or have a generation rate 40 times faster. That's right. And that was done.
That's reasonable, yeah.
And also that was done with artificial selection. With natural selection, things stay a little slower to
correct.
And so
let's chase that rabbit for a minute. With artificial selection, with man doing the selecting, they have now selected dogs to get down to the slice of the gene code of a dog that's pretty small, the Chihuahua. Do you think they will ever be able to get a dog as small as a flea?
This is an absurd question. That's a mammal. Mammals won't be that size.
Okay, how about the size of a pygmy mouse? That's a mammal. There are animals as big as a
It's
pygmy
not.
mouse.
Yes,
It's called a pygmy mouse.
yes, and there's things that classify dogs as dog. What you're saying is, are there size limitations? Of course there are. Are there limitations on God?
Oh, don't change the subject.
No, that's what we're talking about, though.
No,
We're talking about creation.
are there limitations in the genetic code that say you can get a dog
There's
down to a
limitations
Chihuahua?
of every generation there will be limitations, but over time, I believe that a little difference here goes a long way. If you chip at something every day, after a while, you can take down a tree if you only hack it once.
I understand. So let me see if follow this. Stay on this thought now. So are you saying it is possible to get a dog as small as a pygmy mouse?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it possible to get a dog as big as an elephant, which is a mammal?
No.
Why not? Why not? There are animals as big as an elephant.
The way their gait is and their feet, they wouldn't be able to hold it. Their bones would break. Just like we can't be 16 feet tall, even though you believe there were giants of that size. No, our knees and all that stuff would give out and break because the way bipedalism works, we wouldn't be able to walk or run if we were a certain size. That's why people that are 8 feet tall, you ever notice that they need braces and stuff, and they can't run very well? Even the ones in basketball, like Yao Ming, he was 7'5", and guess what? He had to retire at like age 28 because of broken feet, brokenness. People that get a certain height, because once you increase height, you have to increase body mass so much more. Right. But anyway.
Well, let's stay on that thought now.
No,
so you're saying there are limits?
We're supposed to be talking about this next time.
So we bring forth after their kind. I said they bring forth after their kind, and that's what the Bible says.
I'm off of that. I want to know if God has limitations.
If God has limitations, God could probably put limitations on himself, but my definition of God would be one that can do as he pleases. He's God. He owns the place. So if he chooses to put a limitation on himself, I suppose he could. I can limit. I don't know. I think he has a couple times. He limited himself when he became a man and allowed them to crucify him. He limited himself in time, space, matter. He chose to be in one place, where before that he's in all places at all times. He's not limited by time, space, or matter, but he chose to visit our little world where we are all limited by time, space, and matter. I can't be two places at a time, and I can't be two times at the same place.
You believe God cannot lie?
God says he cannot lie.
But can liars say I cannot lie?
Oh, a liar could say that, sure.
Okay, so he could be lying.
Oh, it could be, yeah, could be.
Okay. And also, it's weird that humans can do something God can't in that case, right?
Something evil? We do lots of evil things that God chooses
God has
not
done
to do.
evil things, then by the logic of us, I think killing the firstborn of every person in Egypt would be considered evil. There's some of these people had nothing to do with what the Pharaoh was doing in that story.
No, hold it. Don't hit and run now. We went into Germany. Let's say take Japan. We went in and dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima.
Yes, morally repugnant.
But look how many lives it saved.
How do you know it saved lives?
Well, all the generals did the math on this and said, look, if we attack Japan, we're going to lose 1 million men.
Japan had already been, Japan was sending out feelers for, guess what? A truce. All they wanted to do, or peace talk, but they wanted to keep their emperor. We kept going, unconditional surrender. But in the end, we let them keep the emperor anyways. And if you're going to drop atomic bombs, why not on military targets? We actually killed American citizens in those cities. Those cities weren't even military targets. You think that's okay to indiscriminately murder 90-something thousand, 100,000 people?
You're missing the point entirely. Was God justified to say, Pharaoh, I've asked you 9 times now, let my people go. God said, Pharaoh, I've told you 9 times, I've performed 9 miracles.
He hardened his heart. That's why he didn't let them go, though.
So God is perfectly justified to say, that's it, I'm killing the firstborn of all the Egyptians.
So if God hardens his heart, so he doesn't let them go. He even said he would do that. He said, he's going to let you go, but I'm going to harden his heart so he won't. Not, I'm going to do something where he could have went a different way. He said, I will harden his heart.
Well, you can read the whole story. There are several times where it says Pharaoh hardened his heart.
Yes, you're right. But other times God did. So God wouldn't have done that.
Or maybe there's an explanation that you're not willing to listen to. Maybe I could say the sun shines on a stick of butter and softens it, but the same sun shines on a stick of clay and hardens it.
You
It's
do
the
know
reaction.
that
It's the same
harden.
sun.
You know, harden in this case is not like hard, like something physical. This is a hardening of this
Attitude.
yes. That's not the same thing. Saying that butter gets frozen, or butter or something gets frozen, or clay can harden in the sun. That's not the same thing. Are you saying
Right.
that God, you're telling me when God says will harden his heart, that if Pharaoh had a soft heart, God couldn't have hardened it? Is that what you're saying?
He certainly could have. People react differently when things happen. Like when I went to prison, I decided, okay, Lord, I don't like this, but you're God. When bad things happened to Job, a lot of bad things happened to Job, his reaction was, God, if you kill me, I'm going to serve you. If bad things happened to Nolan, have you hardened your heart, Nolan, since third grade when you said you accepted the Lord? And then
harden my heart? I've hardened my heart for certain things, but I actually learned to live with the bad. I understand that stuff like that.
Okay.
But let's say this. Okay, 1 John chapter 3, verses 6 through 12.
Okay.
Actually 6 through 11. And I'll read them to you just to make sure everybody hears it. And I'm reading from the King James.
Good.
Okay. Whosoever abideth in him sinneth not. Whosoever sinneth hath not seen him, neither known him. Little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin, for he is born of God. In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whosoever doeth not righteousness is not of God, neither he that loveth not his brother. Okay? Now, it says right there, who is born of God does not commit sin. He cannot sin. He is born of God. And it says the children of God. He's not talking about Jesus here. He's talking about everybody that you become. God becomes your father.
Right.
Wants you. So, can people that are born of God sin? It says right here they can't.
There is a very long explanation to this. In the 1700s, I'm going to give it to you. A guy named Matthew Henry did a commentary in the 1700s. Okay, just Google Matthew Henry commentary.
So you don't know the answer off the top of your head.
I did not say that. I said I'm going to give you an answer. But if you want a very long answer, read the Matthew Henry comment. I'm about to give you one.
So I can read the Bible just like you say. You can read it. It says God did this in 6 days. Mm-hmm. I can read right here. It says he cannot sin. That he does not commit sin.
Are you ready for an answer?
Go ahead.
There are two Kent Hovinds. There is one born to my mom and dad, January 15th, 1953.
Is this biblical?
This is absolutely correct. I was born as a physical birth to my mom and dad, like probably you were also, and probably everybody listening.
Is that biblical?
Yes. Because in February 9th, 1969, at age 16, I was born again. And he gave me a brand new spirit inside. There are two, the old nature, the sinful nature. The Bible talks a lot about the old man and the new man. The old Kent Hovind loves to sin. The new Kent Hovind is not even capable of sinning, but they live in the same body. And I have to sometimes, I try to follow the new one, but sometimes I slip up and follow the old one. So the new one cannot sin. The new Kent Hovind is not even capable of sinning, just like 1 John says. It says, that which is born of God cannot sin.
But aren't you born of God?
Well, but not the body. This body is almost 66 years old. It was born to my parents, and it is certainly capable of sin.
But so you're born of God. But when he says born again, it's the same person.
But look what it says. It says very clearly in 1 John 3, that which is born of God. But what was born of God? Not this body, not the old Kent Hovind. The new Kent Hovind is the one that was born of God, and it hasn't sinned ever since.
No, the old Kent Hovind had to be born of God. How could a new Kent Hovind that didn't exist? That one existed afterward, you said. So the old one had to be born of God. And then you say that you became new.
Well, Romans chapter 7 and 8 talk about that. Paul said, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from this body of this death? That which I would do, I don't do. The things that I don't want to do, I do. This is the conflict every
So
Christian.
you're saying that somebody else says you can sin. But here it says that you.
That's the conflict, internal conflict that every Christian faces. The flesh wants to sin, the spirit wants to not sin, and they're stuck in the same body. So there's a battle. I'm anxious to get out of that battle, but so far.
If you believe that you're of the devil, if you commit sin, so everybody is of the devil.
Well, I think our flesh, our sinful nature, came from the devil. Well, it says, no, it says, and read it carefully, that which is born of God cannot sin.
Right.
Well, what exactly? Jesus told in John chapter 3, he told Nicodemus, you have to be born again. He's talking to an older fellow, one of the rabbis probably in Israel. He said, you have to be born again. And he didn't understand that. When you receive Christ, John 1:12, that's how you get born again, by receiving him. So there are two Kent Hovinds living in this same body, and they fight all the time. But the new one is not even capable of sinning, and hates it.
It says, whosoever sinneth hath not seen him, neither known him. So, okay, how about this one then? This is some good. John 14:12. And we could go from there, what Jesus says. He says, verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. And whatsoever ye shall ask in my name, that will I do, and that the Father may be glorified in the Son. And if ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. Can you ask anything in Jesus' name and he do it?
I could ask anything of my dad, my earthly dad, when I was growing up, and he would give me one of three answers. Yes, no, or later. Dad, can I have an ice cream? No, not till after supper. Yes, you can have it, but not till after supper. Okay, so he would put a restriction on that. I think the Heavenly Father knows when we ask things from him, he knows how to answer yes or no, that would not be good for you. If God give me $10 million, he would say, son, that would
didn't say no. It said that he will do it if you ask in his name. Not, I will say no. And it also says that people will do greater works that believe on him. Do you believe anyone's done greater works than Jesus?
Jesus only traveled around his own country and a couple of neighboring countries. Man, I've been to 37 countries. I've been all over the world. Jesus never got to Australia, Japan.
That's greater works than Jesus?
I don't know, but I've probably preached to more people than he preached to during his lifetime.
Of course so. You know that if you take all of what it says Jesus said in the Gospels, it's only about 2 hours. So if he were preaching for 3 years, that's a small amount of stuff that he said.
I think the 3 years is a myth, but that's another story. Probably
there's three Passovers in John.
Yeah, there's 2 Passovers, but
3.
Okay.
He's the third one is when he dies.
Well, you could get 3 Passovers in 1 year and 2 days.
Well, in 2 years actually.
You could get it in 1 year, and 3 Passovers.
2 years.
But there are those who it doesn't matter. There are people who argue about was his ministry 3 years. I think the Catholics made that up.
I think it's
doesn't matter. But
all right, how about this? When did Jesus clear the temple?
I don't know. I haven't studied. Is that a supposed contradiction now you're going to?
I'm just asking you the question. When did Jesus clear the temple, the money changers, and all that? It appears that
he did it twice. When he first came and began his ministry, and then toward the end of his ministry, he did it again. I think there are twice he cleared the temple.
You don't think it's odd that John doesn't mention it at the end and the other ones don't mention it at the beginning?
If God is authoring this book through different people, if the Holy Spirit is guiding them, like 1 Timothy 3 says, the word is inspired. God inspired the men to write. God probably saw, Luke already said that, so John, you don't need to say that.
But wait. There's some things that are in there 3 times.
Oh, I know. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word is established. Like Jesus saying, if you offend these little children, Matthew chapter 18, Mark chapter 9, you'd be better with a millstone hanged about your neck. So if you're teaching somebody evolution and you're offending a child that believes in him, you're in trouble when you stand before God. That's mentioned 3 times.
So since all word is inspired by God is only mentioned 1 time, there's not 3 witnesses or 2 to that.
Well, that's true. One's plenty for me, but if he really wants to emphasize something, I suppose he does 3, and sometimes even 4.
That's something I think needs to be emphasized more than
Interesting. I'll check on that. That's a good point.
Okay. But you think he cleared the temple in Jerusalem and then
Twice.
did it twice?
It's 17 hours.
You don't think that's kind of weird that he could do that in Jerusalem? That's what made them decide to crucify, or that he needed to die. Remember? That's in the stories of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, right? Isn't that what they decided that he had to be done away with? That's when they decided that they were conspiring. It says that.
Well, I think they decided to kill him when he said when he said, "Are you older than Abraham?" They said, "Are you older than?" He said,
"That's in John."
Yeah, before Abraham was, I am. By using those 2 words, I am, they knew he's referring back to Moses when God said, "You tell Pharaoh, I am sent you." Jesus was claiming to be God, so they wanted to crucify him for blasphemy.
Why, if he's claiming to be God, which would be a very, very huge claim, right?
Oh yeah.
Why wouldn't any of the other gospels say it once? That seems to be one of the more important things that you would mention. And the Gospel of John was written after all the other ones, right?
Well, how about in the book of Acts where it says God purchased the church with his own blood?
There's a textual variant on that.
Well, Acts 20:28. You got a King James there.
Yes, it does say it. It does say it in the King James.
That was the agreement. How about John chapter 1 where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God."
But why wouldn't Matthew, Mark, or Luke once say any of these stories about Jesus being God? Jesus, you would think that would be one of the most important things to be said. Right?
I don't know that they don't. I can't think of a verse right now. I have to look at that. Do they?
They don't.
Well, do they imply the deity of Christ? I think recording the miracles of him walking on water.
But he said people would do greater miracles after him. Greater. And he also said that you could do the things he did. Can people do the things Jesus did? I
can't raise the dead.
But he said that the works that I do, shall he do also, that believeth on me, and greater works than me. So,
well, interesting. I've never been asked that question. I have to research on that.
Okay. Of course, and I'll let you research it, and the next time we talk, I hope that I'll give you time for an answer. I don't want to give a gotcha question or a gotcha.
Okay. Well, good, thank you. You're unusual in that regard. Ray Comfort just published a video called "Crazy Bible," where he interviews atheists. Yeah, well, he interviews atheists, and he says, "Look, the Bible has some crazy stories: talking snakes, talking donkeys, walking on water. Why would God do that?" And his answer was classic. Ray's a good friend of mine. I compliment him for doing that video. I would encourage people to go to livingwaters.com and watch that video, Crazy Bible.
You do know that I could get a video camera and film enough Christians and get some stupid or dumb answers from them as well, right?
Oh, atheists do that.
If you edited it well
they
enough.
Do that to me all the time. Welcome to my world.
Hey, I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. How about this? Mark 15:25 says, "And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him." John 19:14-16 says, "About the 6th hour." Okay?
Sure.
3rd and 6th aren't the same, would you say?
Well, it depends which clock you're using, the Roman clock or the Hebrew clock.
So they're using different clocks, is what you're saying.
Well, the Romans and Hebrews use different calendars. They still do today. The Jews they have a civil calendar, a ceremonial calendar.
What about the fact that Jesus ate Passover meal with the other and the other 3?
You're going to a new topic. Let's finish this. Was it
go ahead.
6th hour or the 9th hour? Question: at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's the 9th hour of our day because we start our day at midnight. But it's only the 3rd hour of the daylight if you want to assume sunrise at 6 o'clock.
It says 3rd and 6th, though.
Okay. Point would be, it depends on where you want to start your clock. I think the Roman timekeeping was different than the Hebrew timekeeping.
If you don't think that having that like that, well, if John wrote John, okay, and Mark, who was supposedly taking his from Peter, from what I understand, Mark is a second-hand gospel, not somebody who was a witness. You would think that both of them would give the.
Well, let me ask you this, Nolan. If it could be proven to you that there is a difference in Mark is using the Roman clock and John is using the Hebrew clock, and therefore there isn't a contradiction, would you then go on and look for another contradiction, or would you say,
I don't have to look for any more. There's some that I don't think there's any way to.
Okay, so I guess my basic question, obviously you can see it coming. Do you want answers to these, or do you want to not get answers?
I wanted answers to these. I looked on the internet for the answers to contradictions all the time when I got cable modem, and I was big into that. But then after a while, I started getting hit with so many to where, like, just the fact that in Matthew and Luke, it says that Joseph's father is somebody totally different. Joseph's father. It does not say Mary. Luke says Heli, and the other one says Jacob, I believe. Those are different fathers. And then all the people are different.
They're different for 14 generations, clear back to King David.
And there's only 13 generations in Matthew, even though it says 14. Read it. If you count it, there's only 13.
Interesting. You keep going to new contradictions.
But go ahead. I'm just saying, go ahead and say why you think that.
Well, if you read the Luke genealogy of Jesus, Luke chapter 3, it says which was the son of, which was the son of. So you have to kind of you have to reverse it back to match the Matthew, which was begat, begat, begat. But if Matthew goes from King David to Solomon the king, and then goes on down, and whereas the Luke generation, Luke goes from David to Nathan, who was the high priest, who was the priest anyway, who came and confronted his own dad when he sinned against Bathsheba. But so Jesus had the right, it combined again with Joseph and Mary, where Jesus had the right to be the king and the priest of Israel.
It doesn't say Mary, though. If you take it clearly what it says, Joseph.
Right. In the Hebrew way of thinking, though, is an adopted father is a father, just like Moses was raised in Pharaoh's courts.
But neither one say Mary's father was. It says Joseph.
Well, again, I would like to ask, if you got an answer to this, would you just go look for another one, or do you really want an answer? Are you running from something, Nolan? I guess
no, I'm not running from anything.
Okay, good. Well, if you will send me to my phone, you have my phone number, you call all the time. Send me an address that you'd like me to. Have you read the book by Peter Ruckman, The Errors in the King James Bible, where he answers all of these?
He doesn't answer all of these. I know that.
Okay.
But I've read some of these. I don't have the book, though, if that's what you're saying.
The book is $25. I will send it to you for free. I'll pay the postage. Okay. You give me an address to send. If you don't give me, I'm not going to harm anybody.
We'll do that after we're off the air.
I'll send you Peter Ruckman's book, and you can read it for yourself. All these have been answered for centuries.
Okay.
Skeptics keep bringing them up because they don't want to believe.
Really?
And it's been an hour and 10 minutes. We only got a few minutes.
They got hit. How about James 1:13? God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But in Genesis 22:1, and it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. So neither he tempteth any man, God did tempt Abraham.
I guess that's a definition of the word tempt. If I tempt my children with a candy haircut in the car, is that tempting somebody to do evil or tempting someone to do good? I don't know. I remember reading that. This is not what I focus on in my ministry. My focus is on creation, evolution.
Because this would help.
There are 31,000 verses in this book. Okay, I've read them all many times, but no, I don't focus on the supposed contradictions that you skeptics keep thinking up.
You have.
I've covered quite a few. Well, I've covered quite a few of them, but my focus is on creation, the flood, the evidence for that, as opposed
end times, which you said you changed to post-trib, right?
Post-trib. Yes, sir.
Okay, and you said it was 40. It took 40 years, but you finally did it, right? Because you decided that it was too much. But you read the Bible many times during those 40 years, right?
And didn't catch it, and I'm embarrassed about it.
It's because it's written 3 times in the Gospels after the tribulation, right?
I know.
So, is there a chance that you've had an answer to something else, like maybe evolution or on old Earth, but you just haven't caught that you had the answer yet? Over the last some odd years, you just haven't. Is there a chance?
I believe it. Yeah, when I believed in evolution, I believed the Earth was billions of years old. I believed that for a long time, even after I became a Christian.
But I thought you
Oh,
said
I don't remember when I finally.
you said at 16. You said that you started reading the Bible and you realized that that one of them had to be wrong. So how much longer could you possibly believe both?
Well, so what happened was I fell into the trap of believing in the gap theory for 10 years.
But not evolution.
Well, I believe that the Earth might be billions of years or millions of years old by putting it in a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. The gap theory taught in the Schofield Bible and other places. It's not true. So it took me, I would be guessing, it took me 10 or 12, 15 years to get over all that. And I began to read books by people like Henry Morris, Duane Gish, and those guys. And I said, whoa, this makes sense. And especially when it took a while, so I had to change. Is there a chance that you will change and get back to believing the Bible is true and come join me?
There is a chance.
Good. Okay, you come join our crew.
But you do know that all those young Earth proofs have been answered, and you don't accept some of those.
Well, hold it. I taught school for 15 years. People always gave answers on the test.
Well, then I could say the same thing about those contradictions. Give an answer.
But they didn't. It doesn't mean they have the right answer just because they answered.
Same thing with the contradictions.
Right. Atheists somehow think we answered that. Well, that doesn't mean you gave a logical or the right answer. I had to mark many questions wrong and mark the grade down accordingly because they gave an answer, but it wasn't right. So don't say these young Earth evidences have been answered. That doesn't mean they've been answered correctly.
I listened to that
logically
with the shrinking sun thing, or how much it's gone. Because it's actually 4 million tons. It loses a second because it converts 400 million tons of hydrogen to helium. Yeah. But it loses 4 million per second. But if
it loses 4 million tons per second from the mass of the sun, loses it to space, right?
Yeah.
So the sun is losing weight. 4 million. The text I read said 5 million, but the sun is losing
5 million.
Okay,
the
sun is losing 4 million. 4 million tons a second.
Yes, yes, you could do the whole number. If you do 5 million times how many seconds are in a year, and then times 4.6 billion, you're not going to get a number even close to how big the sun is. It's not even but like 1% of the whole sun's weight. Not even.
I'll do the math on that. Hold it. You're assuming now a linear progression as opposed to logarithmic or geometric progression.
Why would it be so much? If it was that much more in the past, it would have cooked everything and there wouldn't be planet.
Well, that's my point. The shrinking sun and the sun losing this mass. See, the mass
loss of the sun. Mass. It weighs.
If 4 million tons a second gets to be quite a bit when you consider Earth depends upon that the mass. It's a factor in the gravitational pull to keep the distance to the Earth the same.
It's only been less than a percentage. Okay.
Because I don't know that I believe that, but I'll do the math on that. Okay.
It weighs 1.9 to 10 to the 30th kilogram. And the number that you take off of it would be to the 25th or something like that, which is less than a percent. Like even if the sun goes on for another 4 million years or whatever, 4 billion years, it will only lose like 0.36% of its weight.
Give me that. What does the sun weigh right now? Of course, technically weighs
1.9. Well, this is its mass. 1.988 times 10 to the 30 kilograms. Or
let me ask you.
Or 2 octillion metric tons.
Oh yeah, I can count real high numbers. But let me ask you a question. Do you think this sun with 1.9 times 10 to the 30th kilograms was all squeezed into a dot smaller than a period on a page?
We'll talk about that next time.
But you believe that story, don't you?
We will talk about that next time.
Okay. I know you believe it. That's okay. All right. Well, good.
How about this? In the Noah story, you said that you believe that the plants, some of them, they die, or did they die, or was everything killed on Earth when he was in the?
Well, it says very clearly in the story in Genesis 6, 7, and 8, if you read it, that everything on in whose nostrils was the breath of life perished. Plants don't have nostrils, nor do they have the breath of life.
Okay.
Are plants alive is a question we could argue about. In the biblical sense, I don't think so. they're not considered alive. In our modern scientific classification, we've decided plants are in the living category. But there's something different about plants and animals. I think everybody would agree with that. Something different, intrinsically different.
It also says, and every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground.
So you're thinking that includes plants?
Living substance? That sounds totally different than living animal. Would you say that if you were
Good point. I think plants, yes, we see it all the time now. Some plants survive a flood just fine.
But how would they survive over a year underneath water?
Why do you think they're underwater for a year?
That's what it says.
No, it doesn't. It says Noah was in the ark for a year, but
and
he
landed. The flood was a year.
Well, no, Noah was in the ark for a year.
And the flood was a year.
No, he was in the ark for 7 days before the flood even started.
And it was over a month. It was like a year and a month long, or 400 days or something.
No, Nolan, he was in the ark for a year and a month. That does not.
My bad. Let's say it was 270 days.
No, he hit bottom. The ark landed, hit bottom, stopped moving in the 7th month. But it took 5 more months for the water to go down.
Yes.
Parts of the earth might have only been covered up for a few weeks.
How?
You don't know.
How have they only been covered for a few weeks?
If the crust of the earth is broken up like an eggshell, like obviously it is, there are fault lines all over the place. If the crust of the earth was broken up during Noah's flood, which I think it was, the fountains of the deep broke open, water under the crust shot up, broke the earth up like an eggshell, and those plates are still flexing up and down today. The Himalaya, Mount Everest is, 15 feet taller now than it was when they first measured it, or something like that. It's still growing. The Himalayan plate is lifting. Who cares? Okay. Some plates are sinking down. So I think the crust of the earth is still flexing up and down, but during Noah's flood, it would have been more radical. So I don't think you could prove plants had to survive a year, because you're confusing. Noah's in the ark for a year. Part of Alabama was only underground for 3 weeks and 2 days.
All right. So
and I completely made up that number. But
yeah. Okay. For instance, let's it says that the mountains and the high hills were covered, right?
Correct.
So there had to be mountains before the flood. Mountains are thousands of feet tall. Okay?
Well, who's defining mountain?
Absolutely. Look up a definition of a mountain.
Oh, and you want me to take a modern dictionary? Look up a modern person.
So you're saying that, so a mountain was only 300 feet tall? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't say that. I'm just saying you're wanting to put some modern classification.
And it says it landed on the mountains of Ararat, which means they had to have known about those beforehand, or did the person write and name them that later and then wrote that?
Well, the ark could have landed in the mountain range that later they called the mountains of Ararat, because the flood is back here, and Moses wrote the story 1,000 years later. He might have said, just like I would say, the Indians used to live in Conecuh County, Alabama. But there was no Conecuh County, Alabama when they lived here.
But that isn't what you say. What you would say, what is now Conecuh County. That's how you say it.
Correct. There was no Alabama when they lived here.
Let's say it was only 1,000 feet deep. Okay? And let's say that was enough to flood everything. How could something not be flooded a month later? Because water seeks its own level.
I agree.
You know how much flexing and dropping down would have to happen for that? That would be such a large number. I mean, an earthquake, if it's 10 feet, if something drops 10 feet, that's that's
chaos.
So 1,000 feet or something, it would have to be more than that, because it would have to be enough to dump enough water to where that water is gone, and then to where something would only be flooded for a second. But you also said that there would be tidal waves like 200 feet tall or something over and over. So it would keep getting hit with things over and over and over. Do you think this is conducive to growing plants?
Well, I think that's why people died if they weren't on that ark. Everything outside died, animals and plants. Most of the plants. Now, plants can survive either through floating in log mats. I mean, this happens all the time. There are floods in like the Amazon Valley or in the Congo River Valley where it'll flood for months. Huge trees, they just float around, and then when the water goes down, they reroot.
So what about the olive branch that was found
You keep changing stories.
No, but we're talking about plants. If a plant survived,
sure.
There was no plant to be found the first time. 7 days later, Dove comes back with an olive branch.
I know. See, there was an olive tree that was growing in that region that was only underwater for a couple of weeks, and the rest of it was fine. And so the dove found that one.
Ah, okay. And then gotcha.
No, you don't got me. Now listen, let me explain to you. The oceans today, you can Google it, average 12,000 feet deep.
Yes.
That's the average depth of the oceans. 70% of this planet right now is underwater.
Absolutely.
Okay. 30% is above water. We call it landmass. Okay. The average height of all the land masses in the world is 2,500 feet, I believe, or 2,300, around 2,000 feet. So if the continents average 2,000 feet high and the oceans average 12,000 feet deep, 5 times more than the average height of the continent, all you got to do is adjust the crust of the Earth. A 1 mile change spread out over 1,000 miles is 0.1%.
But it would have to be across the whole thing for the not to be flooded, and that wouldn't have killed everything.
If you smooth out the Earth right now, just smooth it all out, it's 8,000 feet of water everywhere, completely covered. That's almost.
Don't you think there was more land mass before the flood?
Yeah, the water was in the crust of the Earth. It says in Genesis 1,
so
the water was in the.
Do you think it was more land or more ocean before the flood?
Much more land. I'm just wildly guessing. 90% land before the flood.
Then why are 95% of all fossils we find marine?
Well, because everything was able to multiply rapidly. The oceans were filled with creatures. Today, marine life
but billions, crinoids and all that?
Nolan, marine life only fills a small part of the ocean. There are huge sections of the ocean with almost nothing living there. They call them deserts.
But if it was small, if it was such a small amount and it wasn't so deep, okay, that they couldn't have lived, there wouldn't have been enough food for everything.
Well, then maybe my 90%, 10% is wrong. It should be more like 85, 15. I don't know what it was before the flood, but the oceans were big enough to have all the animals that we're currently finding as fossils. How's that?
But then why wouldn't there be more fossils found of the animals, the vertebrates and all that?
Well, animals, creatures that are capable of escaping a flood to run to high ground for even a short time are more likely to end up on top of the sediments rather than in the sediments.
But they got buried, right? I thought everything was buried a mile deep.
No, some were buried mile deep, and we do find lots of fossils. The Karoo Formation has 800 million of them, vertebrate fossils.
And they all lived on Earth before.
Yeah, all at the same time.
Just there?
The fruiting capacity of the planet was incredible. That original creation could supply a lot more animals per square mile than we can today. So any farmer will tell you, good farmland in some areas can hold 20 cows per acre. Other areas of South Dakota takes 20 acres per cow.
Do the animals we consider prey or herbivores today have defense mechanisms against carnivores or the predators?
I think they had they use them today for defense mechanisms, but like horns on a cow, those are great for clearing grass off or moving. They use horns for all sorts of things. Besides,
what about the insect that looks like a leaf, though? Why would it?
Well, I think also the horns. Probably the mama cow thinks that looks cool, so she's.
But why the insect that looks like a leaf, or the one that looks like a stick, or the camouflage ones? That seems like they're trying to hide from predators.
It seems amazing to me that anybody can believe that came from a rock.
That's not what I'm asking.
Okay.
I'm asking if everything were vegetarian, why would something need to? You're telling me that since the flood, an insect was able to make a leaf, and
I think you got a couple of false assumptions here. You're assuming that insects are included in the animal kingdom.
It says that they ate plants, not so insects.
But if insects, same thing with fish. They might have eaten other fish because the command was given for those whose nostrils on land. So I don't know that insects would be classified
by birds and by other things.
Yeah. What if insects were classified as a complex, self-replicating food source?
That's not the definition of an insect. An insect is an animal.
No, that's the Hovind definition.
Well, it's wrong.
Insects are insects.
I could give definitions for anything then, and if we're going to just go by that and win every argument.
Right. So the insects were created to be a food source, and so they needed camouflage to hide from other predators.
And
even though
don't some plants
have defense mechanisms, or don't some
Absolutely.
plants? They're plants. They're designed to be eaten. Anyway,
and that's why they have them. And then what about the
our
animals?
time is up. You asked me to present a creation view, and you said you would refute it.
Yes.
Have you refuted what I taught, that they used to live to be 900, there was a flood, and the earth is 6,000 years old?
Yeah, that's the one thing I wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
One more, if I can.
Sure.
When it has to do with dating, and that's it.
Sure.
Okay. Let me get to the thing I have on it. Okay, you talk about radiometric dating and stuff like that, right? Okay. Do you know about amino acid dating?
I have read some on that. I think that's dating of anything is obviously based on some assumptions that we know that this rate has been consistent. We know that there's all kinds of things that affect the rate of decay of all sorts of these things.
But not of radiometric stuff.
Yeah.
You can't change the rate.
They're calling me. Time's up here. Bring that up for the next one. But if you want to schedule another debate or discussion.
Yeah, we will. And I'll have to explain all the dating, because there's about 30 different types of datings that they do, and they cross-check them.
Yeah, blind dating.
That too. Of course, double dating.
Double dating. Yeah.
That dating where it's like speed dating. Every minute, 5 minutes with them, and you.
That's good.
Okay. Do you want to give? You don't want to give a final say, like a?
Sure. I want people to, if they want to get a hold of our ministry, drdino.com, DRDINO.com. My name is Kent Hovind, and our website, Dr. Dino, our YouTube is Kent Hovind Official. You can get all of our stuff and social media contact from the website, Dr. Dino, or you can call 855 Big Dino, like a big dinosaur. 855 Big Dino. I'm extension 3. I take calls all day long. Probably missed 40 of them in the last hour. So thank you, Nolan. You rescued me from my phone. Thank you so much. Yeah. I take a bunch from you all the time too, by the way.
Yes, you do.
And I think I'm always kind and
yes,
considerate. They are not always kind and considerate to me. So that's your.
And can I give a close?
Sure. You give a quick closing and tell people where to get a hold of you if you want.
Well, nobody needs to get a hold of me. I will. I'm not after any type of fame or any type of getting to. It's a subject that fascinates me. I just wanted to say in closing, all I wanted to say is that most of the people that believe or accept evolution in the United States are Christians. And most of the people that accept an old earth are Christians. And to classify them as having a different religion, I think, is absurd than theirs. And also saying that evolution is not a science is also absurd. Who decides what a science is? Scientists decide, not somebody. And that's like, and people thinking, and also with the Bible calls whale a fish, it calls a bat a bird, it's all these different things. And you can say, oh, if it swims in the water, it's a fish, but why doesn't mean that's just changing definitions. That'd be like saying if the Bible called Jesus a female, and then you say, well, in the biblical sense, Jesus was a female. It's like, no, that word has a definition. And just like a fish has a definition, and a mammal has a definition, and whale the definitions of that. But beside that, I believe that if there are contradictions in the Bible, that doesn't mean that the Bible has to be wrong or that you should stop believing in it. I just believe that holding rigid to a certain form of it that we have translated 1,600 years after it was written, it would be not advisable. But anyway, I would like to thank Kent for having this discussion with me, because we talked about it, and he actually agreed to do one creation, and I think he did a good job of defending his beliefs. And then I will do the same on evolution and the old Earth the next time he is okay with doing that with me.
Okay.
And we under and just under 90 minutes there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nolan. Let's do it again. Thank you.
Yeah,
all right.
Of course. Thank you. Later.
Okay. Good evening, folks. Ken Hovind here, and just one of the crew of Dinosaur Adventureland. Two in the room. We're just going to do a quick intro. I did a debate a couple nights ago with the guy who just simply called himself Jerome. He said he has a degree in chemical engineering. Wouldn't give his last name or his location, so I don't know anything about that. We didn't have any visuals. It's going to be a little bit just pictures and audio. Me and audio and sound, okay? Yeah. So anyway, I thought it was interesting you might want to see. I agreed to go with him 1 hour and another hour later in the future if he'd like to do it again and over again. The goal is to get him converted and to get everybody else converted. So I want you to see here the frustration, I guess, that people get when they just simply don't see it. I feel like I'm trying to explain colors to a blind man. They can't see it. They blindly believe in this crazy evolution theory. So instead of a Bible study tonight, July 29th, 2018, will be the debate that I did Saturday night with Jerome at 10 o'clock at night, and I'll be glad to do more. I'd like all of you to help me. Before I went to prison for 9 years unjustly, and that's all on KentHovindisinnnocent.com, I used to do 4 or 5 radio programs a day. I would do a bunch. So if you would all be my PR people and call all the radio stations you can find out in your area, YouTube channels I'd be a guest speaker on. I'd like to make them 15 to 30-minute programs if possible, but I'd like to do many, many every day and defend the position that the Bible is true and the evolution theory is stupid, extremely stupid. Sweetly in Christian love.
And the gap theory. And about the gap theory, right? Evolution fits into the Bible.
Oh, trying to make evolution fit in the Bible. Yeah, don't even try it. There's no need for that. Anyway, please help me with that. But I hope you enjoyed this discussion I had. Maybe a debate to be a little strong, but I'd be glad to do more. Get me into your universities. You students that go to a school that teaches evolution, challenge the teacher. Say, would you have Kent Hovind come speak at our school on creation? And then he'll take any questions we've got. Any questions? At Berkeley, they asked 164 professors. I told them to do this. I said, ask every professor, will you debate Kent Hovind? And they will say no. And they'll give you, I can tell you the reasons they'll use. I can give you a list if you'd like, check which one they're going to use. He's not qualified, no accredited degree, same old story. Doesn't matter. I could be a kindergarten dropout. It wouldn't matter. But they asked 164 professors, would you debate? And they all said no. So I said, then schedule me to come speak and run a full-page ad in the Berkeley paper. I don't know if they did that or not, but you can do this. Run a full-page ad in your student journal or student newspaper. Come here, Kent Hovind, speak on creation. The following professors refuse to debate him. Out here. So please try to schedule radio programs, TV shows, debates at universities. I want to take what God has given me over the years and use it to teach the truth and to challenge the worshipers of Baal who are out there trying to dance around their fire, trying to make life come from rocks. I feel it's just about as dumb. All right, I've got to give a tour of Dinosaur Adventureland, brother, from Gypsum, Colorado. I wrote about that in my story to my grandkids. We traveled around Colorado, an imaginary story. Stopped in Gypsum where they make the sheetrock. Mine a bunch of it out of there. Whole mountains made out of it. Yeah, beautiful place. We'll give a tour in a second. Hope you enjoy this debate. We'll be back on Bible study and talking about bacteria tomorrow night. Thank you. Hello, folks. My name is Kent Hovind. It is July 27th, 2018. I'm an evangelist. I speak on the topic of creation versus evolution. And I have on the phone here from Maryland, Jerome, who says he believes in evolution and has asked me to debate him. I do not know anything about him other than not even his last name. So, Jerome, you said you wanted to go first and you wanted to explain your position on creation versus evolution, and whatever time you take, as long as I get equal time.
Just so you know, your microphone's a little fuzzy, so I might every now and then I might ask you to repeat what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. But can you hear me just fine, by the way?
I hear you fine. Really good. Yes.
Okay. That's good. All right. So let me know when you want me to start.
Go ahead.
All right. So I don't have much to say. I'm basically here to talk about how you basically had an inconsistent position regarding evolution. Because to me, there's two basic positions against evolution. There's what I like to call the hard position, which says that evolution's impossible, that it can happen. And then there's a soft position, which says it's possible, but you haven't proven it enough, so you can't teach it as a fact. Now, in your opening statements in your debates, you always claim the hard position, which is that evolution's impossible. Not only is it impossible, but it's ridiculous. But then when you go on to defend your position, instead of defending the hard position, which is the position that you ended up, you started taking, you defend the soft position, which is basically all you say is evolution hasn't been proven, we haven't seen it. You've never really done anything to show that it's impossible. Now, I know a lot of the time you like to talk about how the burden of proof is on the evolutionists because they receive tax dollars to pay their theory, to fund to teach their theory. But right now, that doesn't matter, because no matter what the outcome of this debate, it's not going to change anything in the outside world. I mean, those textbooks are still going to say the same thing. We're not going to change anything here tonight. So the only thing that matters in a debate is what each of us is saying and what each of us is claiming. So if you're going to claim that evolution is impossible, I think the burden of proof is on you to prove that it's impossible. And also, when you compare evolution to creation, you're always saying that creation is the more viable model for how we got here. And again, you do this position while placing the burden of proof on the evolutionists, while using the defense that they collect tax dollars to fund their theory. But again, we're not talking about who gets tax dollars and what gets taught in the schools. Right now, we're just talking about what's going on in the debate and what each person is talking about. So if you're going to claim that creationism is a more viable model, I think you should compare them side by side under the same standards. In other words, you should judge creationism under the same scrutiny that you judge evolution. So that's pretty much all I have to say. So I'm going to end what I have to say with that simple question.
Okay,
Between evolution and creation, which is the more viable model for how we got here and why?
Okay, Jerome, could you define, what do you mean by that word evolution? What does it mean to you?
The evolution is changing of species over time.
Are there any limits? Are there any limits to that?
Define limits. There's limits to, like, I know the other time we called, you said a cow could never evolve to where it could jump over the moon, and I agree with that. But that's not really a genetic limit that's specific to the cow. I think that's true for all animals. And when you say something like it's impossible for the horse to grow wings and fly, that's not specific to the horse. That's true for all animals as heavy as a horse. I think the heaviest animal that can fly, I'm not entirely sure about this, I think it's the condor, and it weighs like 20-something pounds. I think anything that weighs as much as a horse would have a hard time flying. And I'm saying is the limits that I'm talking about are not genetic limits. They're physical limits.
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand. So you're saying that evolution is, if I have it right here, change of species over time.
Yeah.
Okay. But I'd like to be a little more specific. What causes...
So you're trying to distinguish micro from macroevolution?
Well, if you've seen my seminar, you know I give it 6 different definitions or meanings. Or
Well, yeah, but so I sent you a text. You said you get 800 calls, so you probably don't remember this, but I said I'm not interested in talking about Big Bang, age of the Earth, or abiogenesis.
Okay.
I'm only going to talk about evolution, and that's all.
Well, so you want to start with things that are already living.
Yes.
And then discuss how they change.
Yeah, let's just say we don't know how living organisms got here. Let's say we have no clue. For all we know, God put the first cell on Earth, and then it evolved on its own. Like, I don't know what happened before that. I'm just going to talk about is starting from first life beyond. That's
Okay.
all.
Would you agree that the textbooks and the schools typically do include the rest of the story, which would be the beginning of time, space, matter, i.e. Big Bang, that is taught in...
Well, yeah, but I'm not here to defend that part of it. Like,
okay.
I don't really know much about the Big Bang. I don't really know much about abiogenesis or if it can actually happen. I'm not here to defend that part. I'm just here to start with a story where life started and move forward from there.
So this life that got started, again, I want you to tell exactly what you mean. Was this life that got started like a single cell?
It was a single cell, I believe. That's a theory.
Okay. And Are you aware of any examples of two-celled creatures in the world, or three-celled?
No.
Well, how did it get from single cell to multi-cell then?
Eukaryotes. It started with colonies. My understanding, I think you debated Bill Ludlow at one point, and I think he explained it to you that multi-celled organisms started when single-celled organisms banded together and formed colonies, kind of like mold or pond scum,
Sure.
things like that, or sponges. And then little by little, they would start to form like whole organisms because if you look at like mold and pond scum, even though they're one big mass, they're still individual living cells. Like you can cut a piece of pond scum and it would survive just fine because the cells are still independent living beings.
Right.
But eventually it'll get to the point where they're not interdependent living beings, where each cell has its own individual function and they're part of a bigger whole. So if you look at, I don't exactly know where it started or if there was an exact point, but if you look at an animal like a jellyfish is a living being, but for the most part, most of its cells are similar. Like they don't really have like a clear distinction from one another, not like us, like we have blood and bones and nerves. Like jellyfish are probably one of the simplest multi-celled organisms.
Okay.
And then from there it got to where every cell was very distinct, and then there was distinct organs and so on. That's my best understanding of it.
Okay, now I want you to define your position clearly. Is this something changing from single cell to multi-cell,
Yes.
using the colony route to get there? The cells banded together, made colonies like pond scum, and
Yes.
that pond scum then became the equivalent to some kind of tissue like a heart or a kidney or...
Well, no. You're jumping into macroevolution. It happened slowly, and each individual organ evolved slowly over time. It didn't just appear.
It happens? I don't want to misquote you here. Okay. Now, is this something that you know or something that you believe?
No, I'm not saying I know this for sure.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, this is how it could have happened, but if you're going to claim it's impossible, I want to know how exactly it's impossible.
Well, I guess my definition of science would be things that we can observe and study and test. Nobody's ever observed any of this happening.
Okay, yeah. I know we can't necessarily directly observe it.
Sure.
But can we at least teach it as a theory?
Well, that would be in a science class, we should deal with science. It's not something we see or test or observe. So why are we
There's
teaching?
inference. We have to infer certain things. I mean,
Sure.
realistically, we can't observe everything.
Well, that's what I've always said is this belief that this somehow changed from, say, pond scum or something into slowly over I'll give you trillions of years if you want. This, if it changed into some kind of tissue or an organ, as opposed to a colony of individual cells. Because certainly I would think everybody would agree that your heart is not just a colony of individual cells working independent that can work independently.
Okay, but you're thinking that it suddenly jumped.
No.
From being,
you can go slowly.
Yeah.
You can go as slowly as you want. Your car is a collection of nuts and bolts and various different components. None of which, or let's take an airplane. None of the individual parts of an airplane can fly. None of them.
I agree.
Together, it can fly. So, let's take the individual parts of a bird, since airplanes don't reproduce. The individual parts of the bird, the feather, the beak, the feet, the heart muscle, the kidney, whatever, none of those parts can fly. They work together. Okay. They work all together to create a creature which is capable of flying, called a bird. So, yeah, do you believe that these changes that well, I guess my point would be we observe limits to these things, but you think given enough time there would not be any limits. It could actually change. So my question to you is this part of science or should this be in a philosophy class? Since it's
Not
never...
false, it could be taught as a theory. Because again, there's some evidence suggesting that it could have been true, and there's nothing falsifying it so far. So I don't have a problem with it being taught as a theory. If you say it can't be taught as a fact because we can't observe it, I have no problem with that. But
Okay.
I think it should be at least taught as a theory. And if you think that it shouldn't even be taught as a theory, I think you should prove that.
Okay. Could it also be taught in a theory in the same class that maybe somebody designed it? But we're not allowed to say who we think, you know.
Well, it depends on what you mean by somebody. What do you mean by somebody? You mean like a deity? Or
Well,
an
yeah,
alien,
well,
or what?
you could call it, you could say a deity designed it or a Martian from outer
So that
space.
can't be taught in science class. Now, I'm not saying it's not true. Obviously, as a Christian, I believe it is true to some degree. But it can't be taught in a science class because if God does exist, then he's a metaphysical being, and science only deals with the physical world.
Okay, well, in the physical world, we don't ever observe pond scum developing anything into other than pond scum. So why are we allowed to teach that given time, pond scum can turn to a tissue or an organ?
Well, no. It's not pond scum. It's something similar to pond scum.
Okay, a colony. I'm trying to figure out how you get from a single...
Colony of cells, yeah. A colony of cells developing into tissue over time, yeah.
So you think a single cells can join together into colonies, and that process over time can produce...
But hold on. If you don't mind, I want to go back to your example with the bird.
Sure.
So you're talking about how you're comparing a bird to an airplane, saying how bird flies and airplane flies each has individual parts that help it fly, and each individual part can't fly on its own. It would need all the other parts working together with it, right?
Yeah, well, forget the airplane, unless you have a point you want to make there. Birds are living...
Yeah, what I'm saying is, with the airplane, it was specially designed by people to fly. Now, what you're assuming is that the bird was also specially designed to fly.
Yeah, I definitely...
Which is not necessarily the case.
I believe it is, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, it's possible that birds develop the ability to fly by accident over time.
Well, it seems to me like you're attributing what I would call a deity. You're giving time that ability to do that. Time can do something that nobody can observe it in the present. What if we take a creature that has a very short lifespan, such as bacteria, where we could observe thousands of generations in one human lifespan? Do we ever observe bacteria becoming anything other than bacteria?
No, nobody expects it to. Evolution doesn't expect it to. I believe this has been explained to you before.
Well, the fact that somebody stated something to me before, or what you use the word explained, does not mean it's true.
Okay, it's been stated to you by, I think, Aaron Ra and what's the other guy's name? Herman Mays.
Several have, sure, and they don't get it at all.
No, hold on. What they're saying is, bacteria will always only produce bacteria. Dogs will always only produce dogs. Humans will always only produce humans. Nothing jumps from one kind to another. A dog never changes to a cat. A squirrel never changes to a whale.
I understand.
It never worked that way.
Well, that's going forward. What about going backwards? Did a dog come from something that was non-dog going back into... What was...
It came from a mammal.
Okay. And which came from what?
Vertebrate.
Okay. And so if we go back far enough in time, we end up with a single-celled, something like a bacteria, we'll assume.
Yep.
So starting from the bacteria going forward, you have a bacteria turning into a dog.
Well, it's single-celled organism, not necessarily bacteria.
You have a single-celled organism. Going back in time, the dog came from a single-celled organism.
It came from a eukaryote.
Okay. So going back in time, the dog came from a eukaryote.
Yep.
So if we start with the eukaryote, going forward in time, it would end up as a dog.
Yeah, eventually.
Okay. Well then, Aaron Ra and these other guys said, no, dogs always produce dogs and cows always produce cows.
Yeah.
Well, can't I say all of science tells us that single-celled organisms always produce single-celled organisms? Why would it be different going forward or backward? Either way, it doesn't happen. It's not science.
Well, eukaryotes produce eukaryotes.
Yay,
don't they?
They do. You got it. But yet you think eukaryotes produced a dog.
They did.
Now, is this something you know or something you believe?
This is something that I'm looking at as a theory, and for now, I don't see any problem with it. I don't see anything that proves that it's impossible.
Well, again, this goes to this question, is this science or is this philosophy? You know,
it's not philosophy. You could call it a scientific theory. You could say it still needs more proof, but I don't think you can dismiss it altogether because, again, it has enough evidence to be taught as a theory. So if you're going to say that it doesn't have any evidence, you're going to have to prove that.
Well, I know, as I've said many times, and as you mentioned before we got on the air here, I don't have to prove anything. I'm not asking for mine to be taught. You guys are. You guys are all demanding.
That's what I was saying. Like, we're not talking about what's happening in the school system.
Okay.
Nothing that happens in this debate is going to change the school system. We're only talking about what's happening in this debate, and if you're going to claim something, you have to prove it.
Okay.
So, is evolution impossible in your eyes?
Well, again, it depends what you mean by evolution. I think the creatures that we observe...
I'm saying macroevolution. Macroevolution.
Well, all of the creatures we observe in all of humanity, in every corner of the world, produce after their kind, as I've said.
Okay, can you define what kind is?
Well, the Bible gives the word kind 20 different times in the first 7 chapters. They will bring forth after their kind, and bring forth has to do with reproduce, you know, make babies.
So you're saying interfertility is your definition?
That seems to be how it starts. Now that doesn't mean it can't go beyond that. For instance, Chihuahuas and Great Danes might have reached the point where they're both varieties of the same kind of animal called a dog, but for physical reasons.
We'll discuss that later, but I actually have a bigger point to make.
Okay.
So do you agree that in science, there's this principle that in order for something to be proven true, it has to be falsifiable?
Yeah, I don't think
agree with that?
I don't think it's necessary to get into that. It doesn't matter. It's science. The word science.
Why doesn't it matter?
Well, the word science means knowledge. What do we know? How do we know things? Well, I think for centuries people.
Because like earlier I asked you, do you think creation is a more viable model than evolution?
Well, I would say if you're only giving 2 options, somebody made, let's say, the dog. Or the dog developed from a single-celled creature over trillions of years, quadrillions, quintillions. The
creation model, which is what you taught, like God created everything 6,000 years ago,
right,
in 6 days, versus evolution, everything came from a single-celled organism. Which is the more viable model?
Which is more logical?
Which is more logical? Either, however you want to phrase it.
I think because all of observation from every farmer on the planet for all of recorded history would tell us nobody has ever seen any plant or animal.
So you're saying creation is the more logical?
Absolutely. The only logical conclusion is there must have been a creator. It is totally illogical to say that dogs and bananas are related from an amoeba.
I'm asking you a direct question. Do you think the creation model is the more viable model compared to the evolution model?
I think the creation model is the only viable model. I think evolution model is stupid.
So then let me go back.
Okay.
Based on the science, I mean. Do
Sure.
you mean it's the more viable model based on science, not based on belief, just based on science?
Based on science, I think the only logical conclusion we can come to is there had to be a designer.
Back to my question. Do you agree that in science, in order for something to be proven true, in order for something to be proven right, it has to be falsifiable?
Well,
meaning there has to be a reasonable way to prove it false.
Okay, how would you prove the creation model false?
That's my next question.
So if something...
let me finish. What hypothetical scenario that if it did happen, it would prove the Bible wrong? It would prove, regarding kinds.
Well,
what do you think would happen? If it happened, it would have proven the Bible wrong.
Well, the Bible makes the clear claim that the animals will bring forth after their kind.
Okay.
And so, is there any evidence of that not happening?
Hold on. I asked you a question.
I'm answering it.
What is a hypothetical scenario that would falsify what the Bible is claiming?
Okay. If any kind of animal gave birth to something of a vastly different kind.
Can you give examples?
Oh, if a horse gave birth to a bird.
Okay, there. If a horse gave birth to a bird. Now, go back to the definition of kind. it's bringing forth, right?
Right.
So if a horse gave birth to a bird, that would make them the same kind, wouldn't it?
Well, I think all of our...
I know a horse doesn't give birth to a bird. This is a hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
If a horse gave birth to a bird, that would make them the same kind, wouldn't it?
Oh, so this is a lose-lose situation here.
How is it a lose-lose?
Well, you're changing the definitions here. I'm still wanting...
How am I changing the definitions?
Well, I'm still wanting...
This is your definition.
Jerome, I'm still wanting to figure out, since I'm having to pay for your religion to be taught in schools...
Oh, again, leave that out of this because we are not talking about...
Okay, we're not talking about schools.
What's being done.
Okay.
We're talking about if neither one was being taught in public schools, if there were just two different theories being compared side by side, which model would be better? That's what I'm trying to do now. So I'm starting with the definition of kinds, and I'm asking you, like, okay, something has to be falsifiable for it to be proven right. So I asked you, what hypothetical scenario would have happened? If it did happen, it would have proven the Bible wrong regarding kinds. And you said if a horse gave birth to a bird. If a horse gave birth to a bird, according to the Bible's definition, that would make them the same kind, right? Because the only definition is bring forth. So if it brings forth a bird, then they're the same kind, wouldn't it?
So then, if I say it is not falsifiable,
then it can't be proven right.
This is completely illogical, Jerome. I don't know who taught you that.
Why is it illogical?
Go get your money back from your education, whoever taught you that.
Wait, hold on a second. I'm trying to make a point.
I'd love to know what the point is, too.
Okay, so hold on a second.
Okay.
So creationism teaches about kinds, right?
Right.
And then evolution teaches about species.
Okay.
Right? Now, the definition of a species, from my understanding, is they have to produce fertile offspring. So, for example, a lion and a tiger can produce a liger, but my understanding is a liger is not fertile, so lion and the tiger considered separate species. All right?
Okay.
So you're aware that speciation happens, right? That a population of animals or plants can go from being one single species to speciating into different groups that are no longer interfertile with one another.
Can you give me an example of where that's ever happened? Because I'm unaware of any. I'm unaware of any places where any species has turned into a different species.
No. I didn't say turn into different species. I said produce subspecies, subgroups that are not interfertile with each other anymore. And some of them aren't. Maybe some of them still are, but some of them aren't interfertile with each other anymore.
Okay, I think every 5-year-old would think a lion and a tiger are the same kind of animal called a cat.
Okay. Speaking of 5-year-old, do you think that if you showed 50 different 5-year-olds a picture of a dolphin and then asked them if it's a fish, do you think every single one of them would say no?
I think probably most of them would say it's in the fish category because it swims in the water.
So then you can't really ask a 5-year-old, can you?
Sure I can, because in the biblical classification of things, if it swims in the water, it's in the fish kind.
Okay, but a dolphin is not a fish, though. It's a mammal.
By our modern classification system, who made that decision?
Science.
Science
proves that it's not a fish.
Science proves
Fish have gills, they have scales.
Believe me, I understand. Sharks also don't have scales, and
So you're saying a dolphin and a fish are the same kind? Is that what you're going with?
I'm pointing out that whoever's making the call on how we're going to classify things, just because Carolus Linnaeus decided to classify creatures that breathe air and give live birth and give milk, i.e. the whale, the dolphin, they are in the mammal category. That's a man-made distinction.
The 5-year-old, you're saying 5-year-olds should classify it?
I think anybody with one eye and half a brain would say animals bring forth after their kind, and a cat, like you mentioned, the tiger and the lion.
So you're saying if somebody like a 5-year-old or any ordinary person that hasn't studied science can look at two animals, and if they say they're the same kind of animal, then they should be the same kind of animal?
I think, well, I'm not sure who gets to make that decision. Is it you? Do we all have to vote on you to make this decision? But I think that in 99.95% of the cases, it's obvious what's the same kind. There may be some tough ones that science ought to work on. I'm in favor of that. But I think most of the problem is very simple. The animals and plants always bring forth after their kind, and yet you believe that whales and pine trees have a common ancestor.
You haven't clearly defined what a kind is.
Well, I said the Bible says if they bring forth, they're the same kind.
Yeah, so if a horse gives birth to a bird, then they're the same kind.
Okay, so
what I'm saying is that the Bible's definition is not falsifiable, so therefore it can't be proven true. You need a better definition that has more exact criteria so that it's actually falsifiable.
Okay, hold it. Does the fact that it can't be proven true, does that therefore prove it is not true?
Of course not.
Okay.
Even though that's how you judge evolution, but that's a different story. What I'm saying is right now we're comparing creationism to evolutionism side by side with the same criteria. Now, right now I'm talking about falsifiability, so I'm going to compare the two models. What they're saying about species or kind and how it's falsifiable in each case.
Well, tell me how you would falsify.
Right now, you haven't been able to prove how.
Right.
What the Bible said about animals bringing forth after their kind, how that's even remotely falsifiable.
Okay. Now, how is the evolution theory falsifiable?
Hello.
Yes.
You still there?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mute button got bumped.
Okay.
How is the evolution? How's the evolution theory falsifiable?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that. Okay, so there's species, right?
Right.
The definition of species is it's a population, they're all interfertile, and their offspring are all fertile, right? Now, speciation happens when a single population, a single species, speciates into different groups, some of which are not interfertile with each other anymore. Falsifiable, what I think about that would be falsifiable is if that never happened. If every animal gave birth to other animals that are still fertile with each other, and they never separated, and they were always interfertile, and that never changed. That's what would have falsified that. And obviously, they have speciated. So, at the very least, it doesn't necessarily prove that evolution is definitely true, but it proves that evolution could be true.
Well,
so you see, if you compare them side by side, the evolution theory is falsifiable. The creation theory is not.
Well, I don't think you've yet clearly defined what you mean by evolution, which goes back to the first thing we started with a half hour ago. Are there any limits to? Let's start with your bacteria that develops a colony, or a single-celled organism develops a colony.
Right. Yeah.
And can it ever become anything other than a colony? And where's the evidence for that?
Can it become anything? It hasn't.
Well, then evolution is dead in the water right there, because you have to somehow.
Why is it dead in the water?
We have to somehow make a colony of cooperative cells.
Yep. We still are.
You
still are. I still am. Our bodies are a cooperative colony of cells. It's just they're not independently living anymore. Now they're all dependent on one. Well, most of them are. I mean, you can lose a finger and still survive, but some of them are vital, like the brain and the heart.
Right. Yeah. You mentioned
lose them, you die. Yeah.
You mentioned you could cut off a piece of pond scum and it would just keep on living and grow a new piece of pond scum.
Right.
Can you cut off your finger and grow a new human?
No, you can't do that.
So
like I said, it reaches the point where we're no longer independently living.
Okay, and this is science, or this is part of a religious belief?
Like I said, it's a scientific theory.
Okay.
You can call it a theory if you want. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to say that it can't be taught as a theory, that it's totally impossible, then you have to prove that.
Okay, so your single-celled organisms, let's take bacteria as an example, are going to they're going to colonize and develop they're all going to cooperate as a colony and work together. And what are the steps, observable scientific steps?
And I can't tell you every single step. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. All I'm telling you is a breakdown, like the overall idea of it.
Right, that's what
I'm saying is, like, if you're going to say that it's impossible, like what aspect of it is impossible? You still haven't given that though. All you've said is that we haven't observed it, which doesn't make it impossible.
I don't know that I have to prove it's impossible. Is it impossible for a pig to fly?
You claim that it's impossible, so now you have to prove it.
Well, science deals with things we observe, study, and test. All we've ever observed is bacteria get together and colonize, and that's where it stops. There are no observations of it going beyond that. You believe it goes beyond that.
As a theory.
It's not even a good...
You can extrapolate and make a theory that it can go beyond that and form everything else.
A theory has to have some supporting evidence. What you actually mean is...
It does.
There's no supporting evidence to show a colony of amoeba.
For example, there's a theory that a whale came from a hooved mammal a couple of million years ago, and then they actually found transition fossils going from a hooved mammal to the whale. I know you're going to say, like, all you know is a fossil died, you don't know it had any children, you don't know, I already know everything you're going to say, but it at least suggests that could have happened, and I think that should at least be taken into consideration.
Well, you can take anything you want into consideration, but in my way of thinking, a science class should teach things that is science, things we can observe, study, and test.
We're not talking about what's being taught in the science class. What we're talking about is evolution possible? Yes or no?
I say no.
Okay, so...
It is not possible for any animal to ever, with any amount of time, I'll give you all the trillions of years you want, it is not possible, it is not possible for any animal to turn into something radically different that anybody would observe, and it's not possible for a bacteria to turn into an elephant. It is not possible. It is impossible. It is flat stupid to believe such a thing.
Okay, so you said it's not possible no matter how much time.
No matter how much time.
My question is, how do you know that if we didn't have that much time? Like, humans have only been observing the world for a couple thousand years.
Right.
If these bigger changes take millions, how could you say they're impossible when the limiting factor is time and we haven't had enough of it?
Well, then you're back to your religious belief. You believe it happened over time, but you don't. That's not science. Why can't you just admit this is your religion?
It's a theory.
It's a religion.
Wait. Oh, okay, like going back to religion.
Sure.
What is the definition of religion, and why do you classify evolution under that category?
Well, it's something people believe in, but as opposed to science, you can believe whatever you want. I don't care what you believe.
If you believe in something, it doesn't necessarily make it a religion.
Well, I guess Google the probably 500 different people have different ideas of the definition of religion. My point would be it's not something we ever observe, study, or test. If you want to believe elephant...
Okay, but it's not a religion, though.
Well, I believe it is, but you think elephants came from a single-celled bacteria-like creature quadrillions of years ago. Slowly. It happened slowly.
Couple million, couple billion, I don't know the exact number,
okay,
but yes.
Right. But you believe that?
Yes, and you say it's impossible.
Yeah, I believe it's not only impossible, I think it's silly to believe such a thing.
Okay, how is it impossible, though?
It's not, it doesn't ever happen. It's not scientific.
It doesn't happen in the amount of time that we've been observing it. Doesn't mean it can't happen.
Okay, well, you believe whatever you want. Jerome, I don't care what you believe. But you want to call this science, and it's not science to think a whale can come from...
Can you at least call it a scientific theory?
No, it's not even. A theory has to have... What does something have
to qualify as a theory, then?
Well, how about let's take the hypothesis, or the theory. Can a cow ever get enough muscle to jump over the moon?
You asked me that question before.
I know. I'm trying to get you to understand.
I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I mean, I'm not a physicist or a biologist, but I'm sure if the best physicists and biologists in the world got together, they could write out a formula that shows that it's impossible for a cow to get enough muscle in its legs based on the gravitational pull of the earth and based on the weight of the cow. Yeah, that it's impossible.
So it is possible for cows to jump, but not very high typically, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it is possible that they jump, but there's a limit to how high they can jump.
Yes, but that's a physical limit. It's not a genetic limit that's specific to the cow. So when you say that a hooved animal can't change into a whale, you're saying that hooved animal had a genetic limit preventing it from becoming anything close to a whale. And I'm just wondering why.
Well, I would go back to all we have for science is observation, testing, demonstration. Go ahead and show me.
Okay.
How are you going to turn your hoofed animal into a whale?
Huh?
Would you agree?
Did you describe it over time?
Well,
In the individual microevolutions?
do you understand how whales breathe?
Through a blowhole.
Do you understand that that blowhole goes to their lungs? It does not go through their esophagus.
Okay, I don't see where you're going with this.
Okay. They eat through their mouth, which goes straight to their stomach. It is totally unconnected, different tube than the lungs getting the air through the blowhole. You, however, and I both eat and breathe through the same orifice called mouth. And then you have to have a special flap, a valve called the epiglottis, to change it if it's going to go to the stomach or the
you're saying
lungs.
its body is arranged in a different way, so that it couldn't have come from a hoofed animal that lived on land.
How could this hoofed animal on land, which has one orifice like a mouth going to two different things with an epiglottis, how's he going to develop a blowhole that is a completely separate new tube? How's it going to live in the meantime? And where is the evidence?
Slowly over time.
And where's the evidence for this?
They have fossil records.
How can this physically work? I don't understand how the cow.
To tell you the truth, I don't know how every single macroevolution happened, but just because I don't understand it, it doesn't mean it never happened. I mean, I don't understand how a camera works either. That doesn't mean it doesn't work.
Okay. Well, that's, I guess, my whole point, Jerome. What you have is a very sincerely held, strongly held belief that it can happen, in spite of the fact you have no provable evidence. Nobody's going to ever...
Other than the intermediate fossils?
Well, as I point out clearly, nobody's ever refuted. You can't prove those fossils had any children. You certainly can't
we'll
prove...
just call it a theory for now.
Okay, well then we're back to the main point. Where's the evidence?
So do you agree evolution can be taught as a theory?
No, there's way less than a theory. It's called a hypothesis. I could get a hypothesis that a cow could jump over the moon. So then I get in order to become qualified as a scientific...
There's nothing suggesting that a cow can jump over the moon, though.
Well, that's my theory. My theory is if we give that cow a bunch of vitamins, he'll be able to jump over the moon. So there
is nothing supporting that. There is nothing at all supporting that.
So therefore, it's going to simply stay a hypothesis. In order to be a theory...
Okay, but evolution has the fossil record. They've made predictions. They predicted that a whale came from a land-dwelling mammal, and they predicted there would be transition fossils, and there were.
No, there weren't. There weren't.
What makes a theory?
Jerome, there weren't.
What?
There weren't transition fossils. There were fossils. They're not transition. You don't know that that's transition to anything. Stop saying it's a transition fossil.
But they're connected, though. There's similarities between intermediate fossils. I'm calling them intermediate, between the hoofed animal and the whale.
Sure, and there's no doubt in my mind.
And that's kind of what helps a theory be viable, is predictability. If they're able to make a novel prediction, that suggests that their theory could be true. And I think evolution has demonstrated this more than a few times.
No, no fossils can count, Jerome. You can.
Why?
How could you possibly prove the bones you found in the dirt had any children, let alone children that are different from themselves?
Why did the individual bones have to have children themselves? I mean, do you at least agree that whatever you found in the dirt belonged to a population?
Well, you're going back to the definition of what is actually evidence. You want to use these fossils as evidence, and I'm telling you, in any court of law, a freshman law student could point out. Well, I know what you're going to say. Then refute it.
What I'm saying is, when you see a row of fossils starting from a hoofed animal to a whale, you see similarities between them. It appears that they might be changing. You can say that it's not a fact because it hasn't been proven, but you have to at least admit it's a theory.
No, a theory has to have some supporting evidence. It's a hypothesis. It's a religious belief. You believe...
Okay, here we go again. Religion. What is your definition of religion?
You're not getting it, Jerome. You found fossils in the dirt. Somebody arranged them in order that they thought it might have happened in. I would say none of them count. You don't know they had any children, and you.
Why don't they count?
We never see any hoofed animal produce anything other than a hoofed animal. That's all we can observe.
Yeah, because it takes longer.
There you're back to your magical. If I said, Mary Poppins flew rapidly through the air, you'd say that's a fairy tale. That's not. I agree.
What would be the science behind it?
What if she flew slowly through the air with her umbrella?
Sorry, I lost you there. Would you say it one more time?
Well, if Mary Poppins flew quickly through the air with her umbrella, you would say that's.
I would say how does the umbrella work? See, assuming this whole Mary Poppins thing is an actual theory that we're taking seriously, you would have to be specific about how it works.
Okay.
How does an umbrella fly? How come my umbrella can't fly?
Well, let me take one that's like straight from the textbook, since I taught these topics for you.
Okay.
The textbooks have pictures showing that a frog slowly turned into a human. If I told you if you kiss a frog, it will turn to a human, we would all agree, I would hope you would agree, that that is a fairy tale. It doesn't happen, okay? But you think if we give the frog millions or billions of years, it can turn into a human. I can show you from textbooks that you probably went to school and learned from, since you have a BS in...
They say the frog turned into a human, or they say the frog and a human share a common ancestor?
Well, a frog-like ancestor turned into a human.
Sorry, I lost you again. Can you repeat that?
A frog-like ancestor, some type of reptile, fish, amphibian, reptile, mammal is the series they teach, FARM, F-A-R-M. So, yes, they do teach that reptiles turned into humans. So, that one particular frog did not turn to a human, but the frog kind turned into the human kind slowly. But yet you would agree if the frog turned into the human kind quickly with a kiss or something, that's a fairy tale. But somehow adding time seems to solve everything in your mind. I'm baffled that you can believe such a thing.
Well, it doesn't solve everything. It doesn't make a cow jump over the moon. I think I've explained that. It doesn't make a horse fly. Like I said, there are limits. There are physical limits.
There are
no limits that are specific to just one animal that are just genetic.
Okay. There are genetic limits, but there are quite a few limits. Would you agree that, let's see, bacteria produce more bacteria?
Yes.
Okay. Are there limits? Can we ever get a bacteria as big as a house, or are they limited?
That's a physical limit.
Okay. Can you ever get a bacteria as big as a whale?
No.
But there are animals as big as a whale, like a whale.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what's your point?
So somehow the bacteria had to turn into a whale, or over billions or trillions or quadrillions or vigintillion years.
All right. So I'm losing you again. I didn't hear that last sentence.
You believe you believe something like a bacteria, a single-celled creature, turned into a whale.
They banded together to form colonies.
And turned into a whale, eventually.
Yeah.
And you want this to be taught as science.
I think it at least qualifies as a theory. Unless you can prove that it's impossible, which you haven't done yet.
All right. Well, we're going around in circles here. We agreed to go for 1 hour. It's been...
Let's bring it in a slightly different direction. Okay, so you keep saying evolution hasn't been proven. Fossils don't prove anything. We don't see it happening.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of which, now let's go back to the creation theory. What do we observe that even says that creationism is true?
Well, okay, good. Okay. Here we have a book, the Bible, telling us that God made all the animals and plants to bring forth after their kind. That's what the book says. All human observation says, wow, cows produce cows, cats produce cats, pine trees produce pine trees. We get a lot of varieties within that kind. There are now 339 recognized breeds of dogs, and I don't know how many kinds of wolves. And they're quite obviously the same kind of animal. As I mentioned, a 5-year-old could tell you that. And
going back to that. So a wolf and a pug are the same kind of animal, right?
A wolf and a dog appear to be the same kind of animal. I would say yes.
A wolf and a pug. Let's be specific. A wolf and a pug, same kind of animal.
A pug, okay.
Okay,
yes.
Do you think a person who has never seen a wolf or a pug, or has never heard of either of the two, could look at the two of them and say, yeah, that's the same kind of animal?
Well, that's what science ought to be doing. They ought to be examining things and say, okay, let's look at the body.
No, you're using the whole observational thing. You're saying anybody looking at it, I believe what you said, one eye and half a brain.
Sure.
Looking at it could say they're the same kind of animal. So do you think a person who's never heard of a dog before could look at a pug and look at a wolf and say, yeah, that's the same kind of animal?
Well, do you think a butterfly and a caterpillar is the same kind?
No.
Are they the same kind of
I'm
animal?
talking about the wolf and the pug right now.
Sure. I think most people would recognize, wow, this is probably the similar kind, a wolf and a dog, whether it be a pug or a chihuahua. They would say they have lots of similarities. And yes, they could have
easily. Some similarities, yeah, but a lot of other animals have similarities. Like, have you ever heard of the Tasmanian tiger?
I have, probably extinct.
Yeah, it's extinct.
Well, we don't know that.
If you look at it, it looks a lot like a dog, but it's not. It's a marsupial.
Yeah, somebody decided to classify it differently because it has a pouch.
Look at that and a dog and say they're the same kind of animal.
Well, I don't know if the Tasmanian wolf is a different kind in God's classification, just because some modern person.
Well, you said bring forth after their kind, though, so.
Well,
they would have to bring forth with each other to be the same kind, I would think.
Well, probably all the marsupial animals, the pouched mammals, were a different created kind than the placental
placental
mammals.
A tiger is different from a dog.
Probably two different kinds of dogs. Yes, pouched and non-pouched.
Would you agree that somebody looking at them who doesn't know anything about animals, doesn't know anything about taxonomy, just looks at the Tasmanian tiger and the wolf and thinks they're probably the same kind of animal?
Well, they might. They would be mistaken in that case. Now,
okay, so then if you can't use that as a way of determining it, then what can you use?
Oh, that's just one of many things. Observation is one of many things you use in science. There are lots of different tools scientists use besides observation.
Okay. Well, name one.
Well, do you believe a butterfly and a caterpillar are the same kind of animal?
Well, obviously I know that because I've been taught that and I've seen it. So. Okay.
Yeah. What if you had never seen it? You bring somebody from Mars down.
I probably wouldn't know. Yeah.
Okay. So they would need to be educated to say, no, this is the same kind of animal, just a different stage in its life.
Right.
Okay. So I think somebody might need to be educated to say, well, it's probably not possible for a placental dog to turn into a dog with a pouch, like a Tasmanian tiger. So there probably are two different created kinds of very similar looking creatures that we would probably.
Okay, but I'm saying is you started out saying anyone can tell a dog is a dog, or dogs are all the same kind of animal, cats are all the same kind of animal, but we've just proven that observation isn't always accurate, though. So if you can't use observation, then what else can you use?
Well, as I've said several times, Jerome, observation is one of many tools that scientists use. All we've ever observed, though, is cows produce cows and dogs produce dogs. What evidence would you offer that this can be different? Other than claiming time can do it magically. Forget time.
Okay, do lions produce tigers, or do tigers produce lions?
Neither one. They can crossbreed, though.
Okay, so yeah, they can crossbreed, but they don't give birth to each other, though. Like if two lions had a baby, it would never come out as a tiger, would it?
Correct. Yeah, correct. Lions produce lions.
So does that mean that they're a different kind of animal?
Probably, but the fact that they can interbreed and produce a generally non-fertile offspring.
So they're probably a different kind of animal? That's what you're going with?
Well, this is we're straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel, Jerome. They're both in the cat family. They're both the cat kind. The fact
because what I'm getting at is like you're kind of running around in circles when I'm trying to ask you to define what a kind is. So can you define one or not?
Well, I can't in all cases. Like I've said, I think 99.5% of the cases it's pretty obvious. A dog and a wolf are the same kind.
99.5% of the cases, I would have to disagree with you on that.
Okay. Well, you can believe whatever you want. But what we observe is dogs and wolves probably interfertile. I think we could use the observation, just simply the physical structure. We could also then examine the DNA, and we'd open up a whole new world, and then we probably would prove that.
Going to the DNA, like how different does DNA have to be that they would be considered a different kind of animal?
Well, I don't know where that line is, and again, I'm not asking for mine to be taught, but...
again, we're not talking about what's being taught in the schools. We're just talking about what's going on in this debate.
Okay.
And what each of us are saying.
Right.
So, can you define a kind or not? Do you know exactly where the line is?
I don't know. I don't know where the line... You can't define species either.
I have defined species. I
Okay.
told you what the definition is.
Is a dog and a wolf a different species?
Which dog?
Any dog. Is a Great Dane and a wolf a different species?
I don't know for sure, but I believe they're different species because, again, the definition of species is they have to be able to produce sterile offspring.
Can a
I
dog?
don't know if a Great Dane and a wolf can produce sterile offspring. Sorry.
I think they can
When I
produce.
say sterile, I meant fertile offspring.
Fertile, yeah,
So I don't know if a Great Dane and a wolf can produce fertile offspring.
It is my understanding that wolves and dogs can produce fertile offspring. I think that's
Okay. I
so.
have to take your word on that.
Okay, but would that then be the same species? Why do you have two?
I guess it would then.
Well, but a dog and a wolf are classified as different species. Canis lupus, Canis coyotes, Canis domesticus.
People have different definitions of what a species is.
Yay, you finally getting it,
but
Jerome.
here's the difference, though. At least there are definitions. There is no definition of a kind, though.
I gave
There's
you
not
one.
one single definition.
I did. If
What is the definition? I don't want to hear an example. I want to hear a definition.
if they bring forth, they're the same
If they bring
kind.
forth. Okay, so a lion and a cheetah are not the same kind?
No, lions and cheetahs have been crossbred. They can bring forth.
I'm pretty sure they can.
I've got a chart showing all the different
Okay,
big
but what
cats.
about a lion and a lynx?
There may be physical barriers there because the lion's so much larger than the lynx, like a Chihuahua mating with a Great Dane. But
Okay, what if you impregnate a
no,
lion with a lynx?
I think probably
Sure.
there's a chart. I could call. My computer just died, but there's a chart showing all the major big cats have been crossbred. They get
Yeah, but a cheetah is. I don't think a cheetah is classified as a big cat. I think a cheetah is sort of. It's not quite a big cat, but it's not quite a small cat. I think it's sort of somewhere in between, which. I think it's interfertile with a leopard, but not a lion, though.
I don't know.
I mean, I Googled it. I Googled, is a cheetah interfertile with a lion? It said no.
Okay, all right. We've got an hour. Let me ask you a different question here, Jerome. And I'll be glad to do this. I'll be glad to do this again, by the way, as often as you'd like. Now, is there a reason?
Yeah.
Is there some reason why you want to believe this evolution theory?
I don't want to believe it.
Okay.
It seems to be where all the evidence is pointing.
Okay. Well,
I'm just asking you to prove that it's
Right.
impossible, if indeed you are saying it's impossible.
Well, let me bring this down where the rubber meets the road. God's word, the Bible, which claims to be the word of God, says very clearly that God made everything in 6 days. Do you believe that to be true, or was God lying, or is?
I don't believe it's literal.
So when he said in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, how would you interpret that? That's what it says.
Ask Hugh Ross.
I did.
I'm not an expert in that field.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay, would you
I'm a
agree?
Christian, but I have to confess I'm not very knowledgeable about the Bible.
Okay. Well, look at Matthew chapter 19, verse 4, and Mark 10:6. Those two verses, you put them together, it's pretty clear. Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning of the creation. That's where it started. Was Jesus lying?
Are you trying to give me a Bible lesson because...
No. I'm trying to point out that you are calling Jesus a liar. You are calling God.
You're going this route now, so you can't do it scientifically. So now you're turning me into a bad Christian. Is that it?
I don't know if you're a Christian or not. I would doubt that, but that's up to you.
I guarantee you, I'm a Christian.
Okay.
I'm Catholic, and I know you don't like us. You don't like our denomination, but
there's nothing to do with it. I just go by the teaching. It's not the person at all. It's what do they teach.
Are we going to go back to the science, or are you going to call me a bad? You're going to make me a bad Christian?
I'm simply pointing out that the Bible clearly, Jesus said, according to Matthew 19:4 and Mark 10:6, that he said the creation of Adam was the beginning, and the Bible clearly teaches nothing died until man sinned.
Allegorical. I don't know. I'm not an expert in that field.
Okay. Do you believe anything died? Was there death before Adam sinned?
I don't believe Adam was a literal person.
Okay. Well, Jesus thought he was. So was Jesus lying? Was he stupid? Did he need you to interpret it?
You'll have to tell me where that verse is because
Matthew 19:4 and Mark 10:6. I told you.
Matthew 19:4. Let me look that up.
And Mark 10:6.
Although I don't know why we're talking about this because I was here to discuss the science. If you want to call me a bad Christian, you can go ahead and do that.
No. No,
I came here to discuss the science and
my position
creation and evolution.
Right. My position is very consistent. I think God created everything in 6 days. He created probably, let's just pick a number and say 8,000 different kinds of animals on land. I don't know how many kinds in the water, probably more than that. But let's say he created 8,000 land animals, kinds of land animals. He gave them the ability in their genetic code, which is mind-bogglingly complex. He gave each kind of animal the ability to produce a variety of offspring. So some can survive in dry climate or wet climate or cold climate or warm climate, but they're still recognizable as the same kind of animal.
Okay, but again, you're not really defining what a kind is. So well, it's not what you're saying. What I'm saying is the Bible's, your theory about creationism is not falsifiable, so therefore it can't really be proven true. So if you make a side-by-side comparison,
so therefore it's not true.
Evolution, it's pretty clear which the better model is.
Well, in your mind, I think it is pretty clear, and I wish we could clear that up for you because it's an extremely.
I wish you could too, but it's been an hour and you still haven't, so I don't know what to say.
Well, I may be willingly ignorant, like 2 Peter 3 would be the best way to say it.
You may be, I don't know.
Okay. Well, my position would be God made all the different kinds of animals in 6 days. He gave them amazing DNA code, ability to reproduce a variety, but the varieties are limited. You may get.
You know how many of each he took onto the ark?
I would guess about 8,000 kinds of animals would be a reasonable guess.
Wait, how many? I missed that.
About 8,000 pairs of animals onto the ark.
8,000 pairs, so a total of 16,000.
Right, and Noah being 600.
Does that include insects?
No, insects, the Bible clearly says in the flood story. I'll tell you what, it's been an hour. Let's do the flood story next time. I will defend the Bible teaching of the flood story as being the only logical way to explain the fossils that we find, to explain the minerals in the ground like coal, oil, natural gas, to explain Grand Canyon.
Okay, but we really haven't finished this discussion.
I know, but we agreed to go an hour. If you want to go, tell you what, call me back tomorrow. I have to work for a living, and so.
Well, I do too, but.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can. Maybe sometime during the day next time. You
call sometime. We'll schedule another one, and let's narrow it down a little bit. You think that bacteria forming a colony is
not bacteria, single-celled organism.
Okay. You think single-celled organisms colonizing is sufficient to explain how we get
Not that alone. There's a lot of other stuff too.
Okay. Bring up the other things next time. What else would it take to turn a bacteria?
There's a fossil record that links different animals together.
Well, I pointed out there.
And there's also different ring species, I believe. I haven't really looked into that, but.
Yeah, there is no fossil record.
But do you believe that ring species that they exist?
Well, let's do that next time. I got to go to bed. Okay. Well, Jerome,
is this really going to be posted on YouTube? How soon can I find it on there?
Oh, I know that's up to Nick. He does editing, and he's probably already in bed, so forget it. Probably in the next day or two. Go to Kent Hovind Official, and we'll post it up there. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you.
All right, I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jerome. All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.